Welcome, weary wanderer, to the mysterious town of Gravity Falls, where secrets hide behind every pine tree and memories themselves can become dangerous burdens. Tonight, we delve into one of the town's darkest chapters, the story of the Society of the Blind Eye, an organization born from good intentions but twisted into something far more sinister. This is a tale of forgotten memories, stolen identities, and the price of willful ignorance in a place where the supernatural lurks around every corner. So settle in, close your eyes, and let us explore the shadows of a society that chose blindness over truth. In the autumn of 1982, when the leaves of Gravity Falls painted the mountainsides in shades of amber and crimson, a brilliant young man named Fiddleford Hadron McGucket arrived in this peculiar Oregon town with nothing but a suitcase full of blueprints and a mind that burned with the fire of pure scientific curiosity. He had come at the urgent request of his old college roommate, Stanford Pines, whose letters spoke of discoveries that would revolutionize humanity's understanding of the universe itself. McGucket was a prodigy in the truest sense, a man whose understanding of quantum mechanics and interdimensional physics bordered on the supernatural. His accent carried the warm drawl of the Tennessee hills where he had been raised, but his intellect belonged to the furthest reaches of theoretical science. Those who met him in those early days would remember a person whose eyes sparkled with the joy of intellectual challenge, whose laugh came easily and often, and whose ability to solve impossible equations made him seem almost magical to those who witnessed his work. The cabin that Stanford had built in the woods outside Gravity Falls was a testament to both scientific ambition and academic isolation. Its rooms were cluttered with machinery that hummed with barely contained energy, walls covered in calculations that seemed to twist and bend the very concept of mathematics into new and impossible configurations. Books in languages, both ancient and alien, lined the shelves, their pages filled with knowledge that few human minds had ever attempted to comprehend. It was here, in this sanctuary of learning, built far from the prying eyes of conventional science, that McGucket first encountered the project that would define the remainder of his life and ultimately destroy everything he held dear about his own existence. Stanford led him down into the basement laboratory, where construction had begun on a device so ambitious, so fundamentally dangerous, that its very existence challenged the basic assumptions about what was possible in the ordered universe that McGucket had spent his life studying. The portal was magnificent in its complexity and terrifying in its implications, rising from the basement floor like some mechanical mountain. Its surface gleamed with metals that seemed to bend light in ways that hurt to observe directly. Cables thick as a man's torso snaked across the floor, carrying power loads that could have supplied a small city, while control panels covered in switches and dials suggested operations so intricate that only the most brilliant minds could hope to understand their purpose. Stanford's explanation of the device's function filled McGucket with a mixture of awe and growing unease that settled in his stomach like a cold stone. This was not merely a machine, but a doorway, a tear in the fabric of reality itself that would allow travel between dimensions, communication with intelligences from realms beyond human understanding, and access to knowledge that had been hidden since the beginning of time itself. The mathematical principles underlying the portal's construction were sound, McGucket realized as he studied the blueprints and equations that Stanford had spent years developing. The engineering was flawless, a masterpiece of applied physics that pushed the boundaries of what current technology could achieve. Yet something in the deepest recesses of his scientific intuition whispered warnings that he could not yet articulate, suggesting that some doors were meant to remain closed and some knowledge was too dangerous for mortal minds to possess. As the weeks turned to months and their work on the portal progressed with increasing intensity, McGucket began to experience moments of profound unease that would strike him at unexpected times. While calibrating dimensional field generators or adjusting quantum flux inhibitors, he would suddenly find himself overwhelmed by visions that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. These were not dreams or hallucinations, but glimpses of realities that existed just beyond the thin membrane that separated their dimension from countless others. In these moments of unwanted insight, McGucket saw worlds where geometry followed rules that made no sense, where creatures moved through space in ways that violated every law of physics he had ever learned, and where the very concept of existence seemed to bend and twist into configurations that his mind struggled desperately to reject. The visions came with increasing frequency as the portal neared completion, each one leaving him more shaken and confused than the last. The sleepless nights began shortly after the first successful test of the portal's basic systems. McGucket would lie in his bed in the small cabin Stanford had provided for him, staring at the ceiling while his mind raced with implications and possibilities that seemed to grow more terrifying with each passing hour. The equations that had once brought him such joy now seemed to writhe and shift when he closed his eyes, transforming from elegant mathematical expressions into something that resembled the movement of living things. During the day, he threw himself into the work with renewed intensity, hoping that the familiar rhythms of scientific methodology would drive away the growing sense of dread that had begun to permeate his every waking moment. He double-checked calculations, ran diagnostic tests on equipment, and pushed himself to work longer hours in the hope that exhaustion might grant him the peaceful sleep that had begun to elude him. Yet the harder he worked, the more apparent it became that the portal was not merely a scientific instrument, but something approaching a living entity in its own right. The machine seemed to pulse with its own rhythm, generating harmonics that could be felt in the bones of anyone who spent extended periods in its presence. Its electromagnetic field fluctuated in patterns that resembled biological processes, while the energy readings it produced suggested a level of consciousness that transcended anything previously observed in human technology. Stanford, meanwhile, seemed to be thriving on the otherworldly energies that surrounded their project. His enthusiasm for the portal's potential had grown into something approaching obsession, his conversations increasingly dominated by discussions of the beings they would soon be able to contact and the cosmic secrets that would finally be revealed. He spoke of his mysterious benefactor, a triangular entity from another dimension who had provided crucial insights into the portal's construction, with a reverence that made McGucket increasingly uncomfortable. The first major test of the portal's interdimensional capabilities took place on a grey December morning when fog hung thick in the valleys around Gravity Falls, and the very air seemed heavy with anticipation. McGucket had spent the previous week fine-tuning the dimensional stabilizers and quantum field generators, his hands shaking slightly as he made the final adjustments to systems that would either revolutionize human understanding or destroy everything they held dear. Stanford activated the portal with ceremony befitting such a momentous occasion, his voice steady and confident as he called out the final sequence of commands that would tear a hole in reality itself. The machine responded with a sound that seemed to come from the deepest places of the earth, a rumbling that built slowly into a roar that shook dust from the laboratory walls and made the very foundations of the cabin tremble. Light erupted from the portal's aperture, but this was not the clean white radiance of normal illumination. Instead, colors that had no names in any human language poured forth, hues that seemed to exist in spectrums beyond what mortal eyes were equipped to perceive. The air around the portal began to shimmer and bend, creating visual distortions that made looking directly at the opening an exercise in enduring physical pain. It was through this impossible window that McGucket caught his first glimpse of what lay beyond the boundaries of their familiar dimension, and in that moment of revelation, something fundamental and irreplaceable broke inside his mind. The sight that greeted him was not the ordered cosmos that his scientific training had led him to expect, but rather a realm where chaos and nightmare reigned supreme, where the very concepts of space and time had been abandoned in favor of geometries that defied comprehension. Creatures moved through this alien landscape with movements that seemed to mock the laws of physics, their forms shifting and changing in ways that suggested they existed partially outside the normal flow of causality. Some appeared to be vast mechanical entities constructed from materials that gleamed with their own inner light, while others seemed to be composed of pure mathematical abstraction, given quasi-physical form through means that transcended rational explanation. But it was not the alien nature of what he saw that shattered McGucket's sanity so completely. Rather, it was the sudden and overwhelming realization that these beings were aware of him, that his act of observation had somehow alerted them to the existence of his dimension and marked his world as a target for their attention. Eyes that were not eyes turned toward him across the dimensional gulf, and in their gaze he saw intelligence so vast and alien that his human consciousness simply could not process its implications. The portal snapped shut after only a few seconds of operation. Stanford's safety protocols, engaging automatically when the energy readings exceeded predetermined parameters. Yet those brief moments had been enough to fundamentally alter McGucket's understanding of his place in the universe and his relationship to the cosmic forces that he had spent his life studying with such naive confidence. In the days that followed, McGucket found himself changed in ways that he struggled to articulate even to himself. The visions that had plagued him during the portal's construction now returned with redoubled intensity. No longer brief glimpses, but extended experiences that left him gasping and disoriented. He would find himself standing in his laboratory with no memory of how he had arrived there, his hands covered in equations written in his own handwriting, but expressing mathematical concepts that seemed to have originated from minds other than his own. Sleep became impossible, as his dreams were invaded by geometries that hurt to perceive and voices that spoke in languages composed of pure concept rather than words. During his waking hours, he began to notice details about gravity falls that he had previously overlooked, shadows that fell at impossible angles, animals that moved with too much intelligence in their eyes, and plants that seemed to rustle without any wind to stir them. The realization gradually dawned upon him that his brief glimpse through the portal had somehow sensitized him to supernatural phenomena that permeated the entire region. Gravity Falls was not simply the location where Stanford had chosen to build his interdimensional gateway, but rather a focal point where the barriers between dimensions were naturally thin, a place where the cosmic order was perpetually on the verge of breaking down into beautiful, terrible chaos. This growing awareness brought with it a burden of knowledge that McGucket found increasingly difficult to bear. Every day brought new revelations about the true nature of the world around him, fresh evidence that the comfortable assumptions of normal human existence were nothing more than convenient illusions that concealed truths too vast and horrifying for most minds to comprehend. He began to understand that the portal was not merely Stanford's creation, but rather the culmination of influences that had been shaping events in Gravity Falls for decades or perhaps centuries. The mysterious triangular entity that had provided crucial insights for the portal's construction was not a benevolent guide to higher knowledge, but something far more dangerous, a being whose motivations and ultimate goals remained hidden behind layers of deception and manipulation. As winter deepened and the snows began to fall heavily in the mountains around Gravity Falls, McGucket found himself spending long hours alone in his workshop, surrounded by half-finished inventions and notebooks filled with calculations that seemed to shift and change when he was not looking directly at them. It was during one of these solitary vigils that the idea first occurred to him. The notion that some knowledge was simply too dangerous for human minds to retain, and that the only way to preserve sanity in an insane universe might be to selectively forget the truths that threatened to destroy rational thought. The concept grew in his mind like a seed planted in fertile soil, nourished by desperation and watered with the tears of a brilliant man who had glimpsed the true face of cosmic horror and found himself forever changed by the experience. Perhaps, he thought, the solution to the unbearable weight of terrible knowledge was not to seek more truth, but rather to develop the technology necessary to forget the truths that proved too heavy for mortal consciousness to bear. The winter of 1982 proved to be one of the harshest in Gravity Falls recorded history, with snowdrifts piling against the windows of McGuckett's workshop, and the bitter wind howling through the pine trees like the voices of restless spirits. It was in this season of enforced isolation, when the world outside seemed as cold and hostile as the cosmic visions that plagued his dreams, that Fiddleford McGuckett began the work that would define not only his own tragic destiny, but the fate of an entire town whose residents had no idea that their memories were about to become weapons in a war against truth itself. The workshop that had once been his sanctuary of creation had transformed into something resembling a madman's laboratory, its surfaces cluttered with half-assembled devices that served no apparent purpose beyond giving physical form to the mathematical nightmares that dominated his waking thoughts. Circuit boards lay scattered like the bones of electronic creatures, their components soldered together in patterns that seemed to follow the same impossible geometries he had glimpsed through Stanford's interdimensional portal. In the center of this chaos stood McGuckett's greatest and most terrible creation, a device that would make him simultaneously the savior and destroyer of countless minds throughout Gravity Falls. The memory gun, as he had come to think of it, resembled nothing so much as a cross between a television remote control and some arcane surgical instrument, its surface smooth and metallic with a single red button that seemed to pulse with its own internal rhythm. The theoretical principles underlying the device's construction had come to him in a moment of inspiration so profound that he could only describe it as divine revelation, though he suspected that the source of this knowledge was anything but heavenly. The human brain, he had realized, was not unlike a complex recording device, storing experiences as patterns of electrical activity that could theoretically be isolated, modified, or entirely removed through the application of precisely calibrated electromagnetic pulses. The mathematics involved in mapping these neural patterns were staggering in their complexity, requiring calculations that pushed his considerable intellect to its absolute limits. He filled notebook after notebook with equations that seemed to writhe and shift on the page, their symbols occasionally rearranging themselves into configurations that spelled out words in languages he did not recognize, but somehow understood on a level deeper than conscious thought. Working 18 hours a day with only brief periods of rest, fueled by coffee that had grown cold hours earlier and determination born of absolute desperation, McGuckett slowly assembled the components that would make selective amnesia not just possible but practical. The memory gun's internal mechanisms were marvels of miniaturization, cramming the computational power of a room-sized computer into a device small enough to be held in one hand. The first prototype was crude and unreliable, its effects unpredictable and often more destructive than therapeutic. Early test subjects, laboratory mice that he had captured from the woods around his workshop, emerged from the treatment in states of confusion so profound that they seemed to have forgotten not just specific experiences, but the basic principles of survival itself. Some wandered in circles for hours, their natural instincts apparently erased along with whatever memories the device had been intended to remove. But McGucket persevered, driven by the growing certainty that his sanity depended upon finding a way to forget the terrible knowledge that tormented him. Each failure taught him something new about the delicate architecture of memory. Each refinement brought him closer to the precise calibration necessary to remove specific experiences while leaving the fundamental structures of personality and identity intact. The breakthrough came on a February morning when ice crystals decorated every surface in his workshop and his breath formed visible clouds in the frigid air. He had been working through the night, adjusting the frequency modulation parameters on the memory gun's central processor, when suddenly the equations that had resisted solution for weeks seemed to unlock themselves, revealing their secrets with a clarity that took his breath away. The device that emerged from this moment of inspiration was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. No longer did it resemble the crude prototype that had destroyed the minds of his test subjects, but rather something that could pass for an ordinary household item if one did not examine it too closely. Its smooth surface gave no hint of the incredible power contained within, the ability to reach into the most intimate spaces of human consciousness and selectively edit the experiences that defined individual identity. Yet even as McGucket celebrated this triumph of applied neuroscience, a part of his mind recoiled from what he had created. The memory gun represented the ultimate violation of human autonomy, the power to steal not just possessions or freedom but the very experiences that made life meaningful. In the wrong hands, such a device could transform free-thinking individuals into blank slates, ready to accept whatever reality their manipulators chose to impose upon them. These ethical concerns warred with the desperate need for relief that had driven him to create the device in the first place. Every night brought fresh visions of the cosmic horrors that lay beyond the dimensional barriers. Every day carried new reminders of the supernatural forces that permeated Gravity Falls, like invisible poison seeping through the groundwater. His brilliant mind, once his greatest asset, had become a prison of terrible knowledge, from which there seemed to be no escape, except through the technological amnesia that the memory gun could provide. The decision to test the device upon himself required courage of a sort that few human beings possess, the willingness to gamble with the very essence of what made him who he was in the desperate hope of finding peace. He spent days preparing for the procedure, documenting his memories in written form so that he might later verify what had been lost, setting up cameras to record the process, and writing detailed instructions for his future self about what had been done and why. On the night he finally found the strength to press the memory gun's activation button, McGucket sat alone in his workshop, surrounded by the accumulated detritus of months spent teetering on the edge of madness. The device felt surprisingly heavy in his hands, its weight seeming to increase with each second as he contemplated the irreversible step he was about to take. The target memory he had chosen was specific and limited. The moment when he had first looked through Stanford's portal and seen the nightmare realm that lay beyond. If he could erase just that single experience, he reasoned, perhaps the cascade of revelations and visions that had followed would lose their power to torment him, allowing his mind to return to something approaching its previous state of rational equilibrium. The memory gun's activation was accompanied by a sensation unlike anything he had ever experienced, as if someone had reached directly into his brain and gently plucked out a single thread from the complex tapestry of his consciousness. There was no pain, no dramatic flash of light or explosion of sound, merely a subtle shifting in the landscape of his thoughts that left him feeling momentarily disoriented but fundamentally unchanged. When the process was complete, McGucket found himself sitting in his workshop with a strange device in his hands and no clear recollection of how either he or it had come to be there. The notebooks scattered around him were filled with calculations in his own handwriting, but the equations seemed to describe principles of physics that he did not remember learning, theoretical frameworks that felt familiar yet alien at the same time. More disturbing still was the complete absence of any memory regarding the specific event that had driven him to create the device. He remembered working with Stanford on some sort of scientific project, recalled spending long hours in a basement laboratory filled with complex machinery, but the details of what they had been attempting to accomplish remained frustratingly vague, like trying to recall a dream that had faded upon awakening. Yet the relief that flooded through him was immediate and profound. A lifting of psychological burdens that he had not fully appreciated until they were gone. The sleepless nights filled with geometric nightmares ceased. The waking visions of impossible realities faded to distant whispers, and for the first time in months he found himself able to think clearly about mundane matters without the constant intrusion of cosmic terror. The success of this first memory erasure filled McGucket with a euphoria that bordered on religious ecstasy. Here was proof that the human mind need not be a prisoner of its own experiences, that the accumulated weight of traumatic knowledge could be lifted through the careful application of scientific principles. He felt as though he had discovered not merely a therapeutic tool, but a key to human happiness itself. A way to edit the narrative of existence, to remove the chapters too painful to bear. In the days that followed, McGucket began to document the memory gun's effects with scientific rigor, recording detailed observations about changes in his mood, cognitive function, and overall psychological well-being. The results were uniformly positive. His sleep improved, his appetite returned, and his ability to concentrate on complex problems was restored to levels he had not experienced since his arrival in Gravity Falls. Yet there were also subtle changes that troubled him when he bothered to notice them, gaps in his memory that seemed larger than the specific event he had chosen to forget. The process of selective amnesia, he discovered, was not quite as precise as he had hoped, with the removal of traumatic memories, sometimes taking related experiences along with them, creating holes in his personal history that he could sense but not define. More concerning still was the addictive quality he began to notice in the relief that memory erasure provided. Each successful application of the memory gun made it easier to consider using it again, to identify other painful or troubling experiences that might be candidates for removal. The device that had been created as a last resort gradually became a first option, a convenient solution to any psychological discomfort that could not be easily resolved through conventional means. As winter gave way to spring and the snows began to melt in the valleys around Gravity Falls, McGucket found himself using the memory gun with increasing frequency, each application justified by the immediate improvement in his mental state, but contributing to a gradual erosion of his personal history that he was too euphoric to fully appreciate. The brilliant scientist who had arrived in Gravity Falls with notebooks full of revolutionary ideas was slowly editing himself into someone simpler, someone less burdened by the weight of genius, but also less capable of the insights that had once defined his identity. It was during one of these sessions of therapeutic forgetting that McGucket first conceived the idea of sharing his discovery with others who might benefit from selective amnesia. Gravity Falls, he had come to realize, was a town filled with people who had seen things they could not explain, experienced encounters with the supernatural that left them confused and frightened, their worldviews challenged by evidence that conventional science insisted could not exist. The local newspaper occasionally carried stories about residents who reported strange sightings in the woods, unusual animal behavior, or unexplained phenomena that defied rational explanation. These accounts were typically dismissed by readers as the products of overactive imaginations or excessive alcohol consumption, but McGuckett recognized in them the authentic voices of people whose lives had been touched by the same forces that had nearly destroyed his own sanity. Here was an opportunity to use his invention not merely for personal relief, but as a tool of genuine humanitarian service. If the memory gun could spare others, the psychological trauma that supernatural encounters inevitably produced, if it could allow the residents of Gravity Falls to live normal, peaceful lives untroubled by knowledge too strange and terrible for ordinary minds to process, then surely its use was not only justified but morally imperative. The decision to begin recruiting others who might benefit from memory erasure marked a fundamental transformation in McGuckett's understanding of his role in Gravity Falls. No longer was he simply a visiting scientist working on an abstract research project, but rather a guardian angel watching over a community whose residents had no idea how much they needed protection from their own experiences. His first recruit was a local farmer who had reported seeing lights in the sky above his property, bright spheres that moved with intelligence and purpose before vanishing into the forest without explanation. The man had become obsessed with the encounter, spending his nights watching the heavens instead of tending to his crops, his days filled with speculation about extraterrestrial visitors and government conspiracies that gradually alienated him from his family and neighbors. McGuckett approached him with the gentle manner of a physician offering treatment to a suffering patient, explaining that he possessed a revolutionary therapeutic technique that could provide relief from traumatic memories without the need for drugs or lengthy psychological counseling. The memory gun, he explained, could simply remove the troubling experience from the farmer's consciousness, allowing him to return to the peaceful existence he had enjoyed before his encounter with the unexplained. The procedure itself took only minutes, leaving the farmer with no recollection of the mysterious lights or the months of obsession that had followed. He returned to his normal routines with the bemused gratitude of someone who had awakened from a troubling dream, his relationships with family and friends quickly healing, now that his conversations no longer centered on speculative theories about alien visitation. This success encouraged McGuckett to expand his outreach efforts, identifying other residents of Gravity Falls whose lives had been disrupted by supernatural encounters. A shop owner who had seen something with too many eyes watching him from the forest received treatment that left him sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. A mother whose child had described conversations with invisible friends was relieved of memories that had filled her with worry about her daughter's mental health. Each successful application of the memory gun reinforced McGuckett's growing conviction that he was performing a vital service for the community, protecting innocent people from knowledge that could only bring them pain and confusion. The grateful expressions on his patients' faces as they returned to their normal lives provided validation that his work was not merely scientifically interesting, but genuinely beneficial to human welfare. Yet even as he celebrated these successes, McGuckett began to notice that the process of helping others forget their traumatic experiences was having an unexpected effect upon his own memory and identity. The constant exposure to supernatural accounts, even for the brief periods necessary to understand what needed to be erased, was gradually reintroducing him to the very phenomena he had worked so hard to forget about his own past. More troubling still was the growing realization that his mission of protecting others from dangerous knowledge would require some form of organization and structure if it was to be truly effective. Individual treatments, administered on a case-by-case basis, could only address the symptoms of Gravity Falls' supernatural problem without confronting its underlying causes. What was needed was a systematic approach, a coordinated effort to identify and neutralize sources of dangerous knowledge before they could traumatize additional victims. The concept of founding a secret society dedicated to the protection of human ignorance began to take shape in McGuckett's mind, like a blueprint for a complex machine, each component serving a specific function in the larger mechanism designed to shield the residents of Gravity Falls from truths too terrible for ordinary consciousness to bear. Such an organization would need members drawn from every level of society, individuals whose positions and influence could be leveraged to create a comprehensive network of surveillance and intervention. As spring turned to summer and the tourist season brought fresh visitors to Gravity Falls, McGuckett began the careful work of assembling this network of willing amnesiacs, seeking out individuals whose own encounters with the supernatural had left them receptive to the idea that some knowledge was too dangerous to retain. The memory gun, originally created as a tool of personal salvation, was about to become the foundation of an organization that would reshape the very nature of human consciousness in the strangest town in Oregon. The Gravity Falls Museum of History stood like a monument to forgotten dreams on the corner of Main Street and Museum Drive, its Victorian architecture, a testament to the town's ambitious past, when civic leaders had envisioned their community becoming a center of learning and culture that would rival the great cities of the East Coast. Built in 1897 with funds donated by the lumber barons who had made their fortunes harvesting the ancient forests of the Pacific Northwest, the museum had been designed to house collections that would educate and inspire generations of visitors about the natural wonders and human achievements that defined this remote corner of Oregon. Yet by the summer of 1983, when Fiddleford McGuckett first walked through its ornate front doors with plans that would transform the institution into something its founders could never have imagined, the museum had become a sad reflection of Gravity Falls' diminished circumstances. The exhibits that had once drawn tourists from across the region now gathered dust behind glass cases that had not been cleaned in months, while the educational programs that had been the pride of the community had been cancelled due to lack of interest and funding. The museum's curator, a well-meaning but overwhelmed woman named Donna Sweetwater, presided over this decline with the resigned dignity of a ship's captain watching her vessel slowly take on water. She had inherited the position from her predecessor 5 years earlier, along with a building that required constant maintenance, collections that needed professional conservation, and an annual budget that seemed to shrink with each passing fiscal year, as the town council found more pressing uses for public funds. It was this institutional vulnerability that McGuckett recognized and exploited with the calculating precision of a scientist, identifying the weakest point in an experimental apparatus. Donna's desperate need for assistance, combined with her natural inclination to trust anyone who showed genuine interest in the museum's mission, made her the perfect unwitting accomplice for the transformation that was about to take place. McGuckett's initial approach was characterized by the charm and enthusiasm that had made him popular among his academic colleagues, presenting himself as a wealthy collector, an amateur historian who had become fascinated by the unique character of Gravity Falls during his extended visit to the region. He spoke eloquently about the importance of preserving local heritage, donated generous sums to support the museum's educational programs, and volunteered countless hours helping to reorganize exhibits and catalog artifacts that had been neglected for years. His genuine expertise in multiple fields, from engineering to anthropology, made him an invaluable resource for a curator who had been struggling to maintain professional standards with inadequate support and resources. When McGuckett offered to fund the installation of new security systems and climate control equipment, Donna accepted with gratitude that bordered on tears of relief. When he proposed establishing a private research facility in the museum's unused basement spaces, she readily agreed to arrangements that would provide much-needed rental income while advancing the institution's scholarly mission. The legal documents that formalized these arrangements were masterpieces of bureaucratic obfuscation, filled with language so technical and convoluted that even careful readers would have difficulty understanding their true implications. McGucket had crafted them with the same attention to detail that he brought to his scientific work, creating contracts that appeared to grant him temporary use of basement storage areas, while actually providing virtually unlimited access to the entire building and legal protection for activities that the curator could never have imagined. The transformation of the museum's basement began immediately after the paperwork was signed, with construction crews working during evening hours when the building was officially closed to the public. McGucket supervised every aspect of the renovation personally, his plans calling for modifications so extensive that they effectively created an entirely separate facility within the existing structure, connected to the main building through passages that could be sealed and hidden when necessary. The most significant of these modifications was the excavation of additional basement levels that extended far beneath the museum's original foundation, carved from bedrock with precision that spoke of both engineering expertise and unlimited financial resources. These new chambers were designed according to specifications that seemed to draw inspiration from sources beyond conventional architecture, their walls following geometric principles that created subtle psychological effects in anyone who spent extended periods within them. The main ceremonial hall, located at the deepest level of this underground complex, was perhaps the most remarkable space ever created within the boundaries of Gravity Falls. Its circular design recalled the amphitheaters of ancient civilizations, with tiered seating arranged around a central platform where the society's most important rituals would take place. The walls were lined with symbols that appeared to be decorative elements, but actually served as components in a sophisticated system of acoustic engineering, designed to enhance the effectiveness of the memory gun's electromagnetic pulses. Lighting throughout the complex was provided by fixtures that produced illumination in specific frequencies chosen for their psychological effects, creating an atmosphere of calm contemplation that would help subjects remain relaxed during memory erasure procedures. The air circulation system incorporated elements that McGucket had borrowed from sensory deprivation research, subtly altering oxygen levels and introducing trace amounts of naturally occurring compounds that promoted states of mental tranquility and reduced resistance to suggestion. The construction of hidden passages throughout the museum required modifications that were both architecturally challenging and potentially dangerous to the building's structural integrity. McGucket's plans called for new doorways carved through load-bearing walls, secret staircases that connected multiple levels without appearing on official blueprints, and concealed entrances that could be accessed from various points throughout the main building without detection by casual visitors or even dedicated searchers. These passages were designed with the same attention to psychological manipulation that characterized the ceremonial spaces, their narrow dimensions and indirect routes, creating subtle feelings of disorientation that would make intruders less likely to remember accurate details about their location and layout. Emergency exits were concealed within the museum's legitimate architectural features, appearing to visitors as ordinary maintenance doors or storage closets, while actually providing quick escape routes for society members if their activities were ever discovered. The installation of surveillance equipment throughout both the museum and the surrounding neighborhood represented perhaps the most extensive domestic spying operation ever conducted in a small American community. McGucket's network of cameras, microphones, and motion detectors created a web of observation that could monitor virtually every public space in Gravity Falls, while specialized sensors designed to detect supernatural activity provided early warning of anomalous events that might require the society's intervention. The technological sophistication of this surveillance network far exceeded anything available to law enforcement agencies of the era, incorporating experimental systems that McGucket had developed during his work on interdimensional physics. These devices could detect energy signatures associated with paranormal phenomena, identify individuals whose behavior patterns suggested recent supernatural encounters, and even monitor the emotional states of subjects through analysis of their vocal patterns and body language captured by remote sensors. The museum's legitimate collections provided perfect cover for the accumulation of supernatural artifacts that the society deemed too dangerous for public knowledge. Objects with anomalous properties could be stored among ordinary historical specimens, their unusual characteristics attributed to primitive craftsmanship or the deteriorating effects of age rather than genuine magical influence. Visitors who noticed something strange about these exhibits would likely dismiss their observations as tricks of lighting or products of imagination rather than evidence of genuine supernatural phenomena. More significantly, the museum's role as a repository of local history gave the society legitimate access to records and documents that might contain information about past supernatural events in Gravity Falls. Birth certificates, newspaper archives, property deeds, and personal correspondence donated by local families all became potential sources of intelligence about individuals whose ancestors might have encountered anomalous phenomena, creating comprehensive genealogical databases that could be used to identify bloodlines with heightened sensitivity to supernatural influences. The society's influence over Donna Sweetwater evolved gradually from partnership to subtle control, achieved through techniques that were more psychological than technological. McGucket understood that direct manipulation would eventually be detected and resisted, while indirect influence through carefully managed social and financial pressures could achieve the same results while appearing to preserve the curator's autonomy and decision-making authority. Regular donations to the museum's operating fund created financial dependency that made Donna reluctant to question activities that might jeopardize her institution's newfound stability. Social isolation was achieved through the introduction of the curator to society members, who gradually became her primary social circle, their conversations subtly reinforcing worldviews that supported the organization's goals, while discouraging curiosity about subjects that might prove problematic. Most effectively, McGucket began using the memory gun on Donna herself, not to erase specific memories, but to edit her recollections of suspicious activities and reduce her natural tendency to ask probing questions about the society's operations. These treatments were administered during what appeared to be casual social visits. The device concealed within ordinary objects that would attract no attention from someone who had never seen its effects demonstrated. The result was a curator who remained professionally competent and personally likable, while gradually losing the intellectual independence necessary to recognize that her beloved museum had become the headquarters for an organization whose activities would have horrified her if she had been capable of perceiving them clearly. She continued to perform her duties with dedication and skill, but her understanding of events occurring around her became increasingly filtered through perspectives that aligned with the society's interests rather than objective reality. The establishment of the society's public presence within Gravity Falls required careful attention to the social dynamics and power structures that governed community life in the small town. McGucket understood that lasting influence could only be achieved by working within existing institutions rather than attempting to replace them, identifying key individuals whose cooperation could be obtained through combinations of persuasion, incentive, and, when necessary, selective memory modification. The police department presented both the greatest challenge and the most important opportunity for the society's expansion plans. Law enforcement officers were naturally suspicious of secretive organizations and possessed investigative training that made them more likely to discover evidence of the society's activities. Yet their authority and access to information also made them invaluable potential allies who could provide both protection and intelligence-gathering capabilities that civilian members could never match. Chief Edwin Durland, a career law enforcement officer whose dedication to public service was matched only by his limited imagination regarding unconventional threats to community welfare, became the society's first major recruitment target within local government. His encounters with unexplained phenomena during routine patrol duties had left him confused and frustrated, filing reports that his superiors inevitably classified as misunderstandings or equipment malfunctions rather than genuine evidence of supernatural activity. McGucket approached the chief with the respect due to a fellow professional, presenting the society's mission as a community service organization dedicated to helping residents cope with stress and trauma that conventional support systems were not equipped to address. The memory gun was described as an advanced therapeutic device developed by cutting-edge medical research, its effects explained in terms of post-traumatic stress treatment rather than supernatural encounter management. The chief's recruitment was accomplished through a combination of demonstration and gradually escalating commitment, beginning with the treatment of a patrol officer who had been exhibiting signs of psychological distress following an unexplained encounter in the forest. When the memory erasure procedure produced immediate and dramatic improvements in the officer's mental state, Chief Durland became convinced that McGucket's organization represented a valuable resource for maintaining the psychological wellness of his department. From this initial success, the society's influence spread throughout the police department with the organic growth pattern of a beneficial infection. Each successful treatment creating new advocates who could identify additional candidates for recruitment or therapeutic intervention. Officers who had been struggling with unexplained memories found relief through selective amnesia, while those who had never encountered supernatural phenomena were educated about the importance of protecting civilian populations from psychological trauma that could result from exposure to unexplainable events. The integration of law enforcement personnel into the society's structure provided capabilities that transformed it from a small group of individuals sharing therapeutic resources into a genuine intelligence organization with the power to monitor and influence events throughout the Gravity Falls region. Police records became accessible to society researchers, providing detailed documentation of supernatural incidents that had been officially dismissed or misclassified. Radio communications could be monitored to provide early warning of developing situations that might require intervention. Most importantly, the legal authority of police officers could be used to discourage independent investigation of phenomena that the society preferred to handle through its own methods. Similar recruitment strategies were employed to establish influence within other key community institutions, from the school system to the local medical establishment. Teachers who had observed children displaying knowledge or abilities that could not be easily explained were offered counseling services that helped them reinterpret these observations in conventional terms. Healthcare professionals were provided with continuing education programs that emphasized psychological rather than supernatural explanations for unusual patient symptoms and behaviors. The local newspaper presented unique challenges due to its role in disseminating information to the general public, but also offered opportunities to shape community perceptions of events that the society preferred to keep hidden from widespread awareness. The editor, a dedicated journalist whose commitment to truth occasionally conflicted with the society's goals, received careful attention designed to influence editorial decisions without arousing suspicions about external manipulation. Rather than attempting to suppress news stories entirely, which would have been both difficult to achieve and likely to attract unwanted attention, the society developed subtle methods of influencing how supernatural events were reported to the public. Witnesses whose accounts contained accurate but problematic details received memory treatments that altered their recollections, while evidence that supported unconventional explanations was either removed or presented in contexts that encouraged skeptical interpretation. The result was news coverage that acknowledged unusual events while consistently providing rational explanations that discouraged readers from drawing supernatural conclusions. Monster sightings became cases of mistaken identity involving known wildlife species. Unexplained phenomena were attributed to weather conditions or equipment malfunctions, and personal accounts that deviated from conventional reality were presented as entertaining local folklore rather than serious testimonies requiring investigation. The society's growing influence within community institutions created a feedback loop that strengthened its position while reducing the likelihood that its activities would be detected by outside observers. As more local leaders became either members or unknowing allies, the organization's ability to shape public perception and control information flow increased exponentially, creating an environment where supernatural events were systematically ignored, explained away, or forgotten before they could disturb the comfortable illusions that define normal life in Gravity Falls. By the autumn of 1983, less than 1 year after McGucket had first conceived the idea of organized memory management, the Society of the Blind Eye had established itself as an invisible but pervasive influence throughout the community. Its membership included representatives from every major institution and social group, while its surveillance capabilities provided comprehensive monitoring of both normal community activities and supernatural phenomena that continued to occur with disturbing frequency in the region. The museum that served as the Society's headquarters had been transformed from a struggling cultural institution into the nerve center of an operation that combined advanced technology with sophisticated psychological manipulation to maintain what McGucket had come to think of as the cognitive peace of Gravity Falls. The building's public areas continued to function as a legitimate educational facility, while its hidden chambers housed equipment and personnel devoted to protecting the town's residents from knowledge that could shatter their worldviews and destroy their mental stability. Yet, even as McGucket celebrated the successful establishment of his organization and the obvious benefits it was providing to the community, subtle signs were beginning to appear that suggested the Society's mission might be more complicated and dangerous than he had originally anticipated. The frequency of supernatural events in Gravity Falls was not decreasing despite the Society's efforts to manage their psychological impact, while the memory gun's effects on both subjects and operators were proving to have long-term consequences that had not been anticipated in its original design specifications. Most troubling of all was McGucket's growing realization that his own memory and identity were continuing to deteriorate despite his careful efforts to limit his use of the device to specific traumatic experiences. The brilliant scientist who had arrived in Gravity Falls with revolutionary ideas about interdimensional physics was slowly becoming someone simpler and less capable, his genius dissolving like sugar in rain as the accumulating effects of repeated memory erasure ate away at the neural pathways that had once made him exceptional. The society that had been created to protect others from dangerous knowledge was beginning to consume its own founder, transforming the man who had sacrificed everything to shield his community from cosmic horror into a living demonstration of the price that such protection ultimately demanded from those brave or foolish enough to pay it. The evolution of the memory gun from McGucket's crude first prototype into a sophisticated instrument of selective amnesia, represented one of the most remarkable achievements in the history of neuroscience, though its very existence would remain forever hidden from the academic community that might have celebrated such a breakthrough. What had begun as a desperate attempt to escape personal trauma had transformed over the course of months into a precision tool capable of editing human consciousness with surgical accuracy, its mechanisms refined through countless iterations and improvements that pushed the boundaries of what 19th century technology should have been capable of achieving. The original device had been little more than an electromagnetic pulse generator housed in a metal casing that resembled a television remote control, its effects crude and unpredictable, often erasing far more than intended while leaving subjects in states of confusion that lasted for hours or even days. The circuitry was a maze of hand-soldered connections that frequently failed under the stress of operation, while the power supply required bulky external batteries that made the device impractical for field use and difficult to conceal during covert operations. McGuckett's genius lay not merely in his ability to identify and solve these technical challenges, but in his systematic approach to understanding the fundamental principles that governed human memory, formation, and storage. Working alone in his workshop during the long winter nights of 1983, surrounded by notebooks filled with calculations that seemed to exist at the intersection of neurology and pure mathematics, he gradually developed theoretical frameworks that explained memory as a form of electrochemical encoding that could be manipulated through precisely calibrated electromagnetic fields. The breakthrough that enabled the creation of the second-generation memory gun came through McGuckett's realization that different types of memories were stored in distinct neural patterns that could be identified and targeted individually. Traumatic experiences, he discovered, created unique electrical signatures that distinguished them from ordinary recollections, while emotional associations left traces that could be severed without affecting the basic factual content of remembered events. This discovery led to the development of scanning modes that allowed the device to analyze a subject's neural activity and identify specific memories based on their electromagnetic characteristics. The process required subjects to consciously recall the experiences targeted for erasure, their mental focus serving as a beacon that guided the memory gun's targeting systems to the precise neural pathways that needed to be disrupted. The technical challenges involved in creating such sophisticated scanning capabilities pushed McGuckett to develop entirely new approaches to miniaturization and signal processing. Components that should have required room-sized computers were compressed into circuits no larger than playing cards, their functionality achieved through design principles that seemed to draw inspiration from sources beyond conventional electronics engineering. The power supply problems that had plagued the original device were solved through the development of advanced battery technology that could store tremendous amounts of energy in compact configurations while maintaining stable output over extended periods of use. These batteries incorporated chemical processes that McGuckett had derived from his study of certain mineral formations found in the caves beneath Gravity Falls, substances that seemed to possess electromagnetic properties that defied conventional understanding of how matter should behave. Perhaps most remarkably, the refined memory gun incorporated safety systems designed to prevent the kind of catastrophic memory loss that had occurred during early experiments with the prototype. These safeguards monitored subjects' neural activity during erasure procedures, automatically terminating the process if vital cognitive functions showed signs of disruption, while built-in redundancies ensured that core personality traits and basic life skills would remain intact even if targeting systems malfunctioned. The device that emerged from this intensive development process bore little resemblance to its crude predecessor, its sleek exterior concealing mechanisms of incredible complexity that represented the pinnacle of McGuckett's scientific achievement. No longer did it require external power sources or produce the telltale electromagnetic signatures that might attract unwanted attention from sensitive detection equipment. The new memory gun was silent in operation, efficient in power consumption, and capable of effects so precisely controlled that subjects often remained unaware that any procedure had been performed. Yet even as McGuckett celebrated these technical achievements, he began to notice troubling patterns in the device's long-term effects that had not been apparent during initial testing phases. Subjects who underwent multiple memory erasure procedures seemed to experience gradual degradation in their overall cognitive function, their ability to form new memories becoming impaired even when the device was used with perfect technical precision and all safety protocols were carefully observed. The phenomenon appeared to be cumulative, with each successive treatment contributing to an erosion of mental capacity that became more pronounced over time. Subjects who had received extensive memory modification displayed symptoms that resembled the early stages of dementia. Their attention spans shortened, and their ability to concentrate on complex tasks diminished in ways that could not be explained by the specific memories that had been removed. More disturbing still was McGuckett's growing realization that operators of the memory gun were not immune to these effects, despite their role as administrators rather than subjects of the erasure procedures. Prolonged exposure to the electromagnetic fields generated during device operation seemed to produce subtle changes in brain chemistry that accumulated over months of regular use, creating cognitive deficits that were initially too minor to notice, but gradually became impossible to ignore. This discovery prompted McGuckett to develop increasingly sophisticated monitoring protocols designed to track the neurological health of both society members and their subjects over extended periods. Brain function tests became standard components of society meetings, while detailed medical records were maintained to document any changes that might indicate harmful effects from memory gun exposure. The results of this research were simultaneously reassuring and deeply troubling. While immediate physical health seemed unaffected by memory erasure procedures, psychological testing revealed patterns of change that suggested fundamental alterations in how treated individuals processed information and formed emotional connections to their experiences. Subjects showed decreased emotional responsiveness to events that should have been significant. Their reactions flattened in ways that made them seem somehow less fully human than they had been before treatment. These findings led McGuckett to develop what he termed optimal dosage protocols, designed to minimize harmful effects while preserving the therapeutic benefits that had made the memory gun invaluable for protecting gravity falls. Residents from supernatural trauma. The new procedures called for longer intervals between treatments, more precise targeting of specific neural pathways, and careful monitoring of subjects' mental status to detect early warning signs of cognitive deterioration. Yet even with these precautions in place, the society's growing understanding of the memory gun's effects raised ethical questions that McGuckett found increasingly difficult to answer. The device that had been created as a tool of healing was revealing itself to have side effects that bordered on the criminal, transforming willing volunteers into diminished versions of their former selves, while claiming to offer them psychological relief from traumatic experiences. The development of more sophisticated memory analysis techniques allowed the society to identify and catalogue different categories of supernatural encounters based on their psychological impact and potential for causing long-term trauma. Simple monster sightings that could be easily rationalized required minimal intervention, often nothing more than suggestion and misdirection to encourage subjects to dismiss their experiences as cases of mistaken identity or products of imagination. More complex encounters involving direct interaction with supernatural entities required carefully calibrated partial memory erasure that removed specific details while preserving general recollections that could be reinterpreted in umsmell. Conventional terms. Subjects who had spoken with ghosts might remember having conversations with eccentric strangers, while those who had witnessed magical transformations would recall unusual but ultimately explainable natural phenomena. The most severe cases involved individuals who had gained direct knowledge of cosmic truths that threatened to shatter their fundamental understanding of reality itself. These subjects required comprehensive memory restructuring that amounted to complete personality modification, their entire worldview rebuilt from the ground up to eliminate any trace of the revelations that had driven them toward madness. The technical challenges involved in performing such extensive memory modification pushed the limits of what the memory gun could accomplish, requiring procedures that lasted for hours and involved multiple sessions spread across weeks or months. Subjects undergoing comprehensive restructuring were essentially placed in temporary custody at secure facilities where their recovery could be monitored and their integration back into normal society carefully managed. Yet for all the sophistication of these procedures, McGucket could not escape the growing realization that each successful treatment created a person who was fundamentally different from the individual who had originally sought help. The memories that defined human identity were so intricately interconnected that removing traumatic experiences inevitably affected adjacent recollections, creating cascade effects that altered personality traits and behavioral patterns in ways that could not be predicted or controlled. The society's growing expertise in memory manipulation led to the development of specialized techniques for different categories of subjects based on their age, educational background, and psychological profiles. Children, whose neural plasticity made them both more vulnerable to supernatural trauma and more responsive to memory modification, received treatments designed to integrate false memories so seamlessly that the subjects themselves would never suspect that their recollections had been altered. Adults with advanced education or scientific training required more sophisticated approaches that took into account their analytical thinking patterns and tendency to question inconsistencies in their memories. These subjects often received partial erasures combined with false memory implantation, designed to provide rational explanations for any residual emotional responses or behavioral changes that might otherwise raise suspicions about their treatment. Elderly subjects presented unique challenges due to natural memory degradation that made it difficult to distinguish between age-related cognitive decline and effects caused by memory gun exposure. These individuals often required careful psychological evaluation before treatment to establish baseline mental function, while post-procedure monitoring needed to account for normal aging processes that might mask or complicate the detection of treatment-related side effects. The development of cover story protocols became one of the society's most sophisticated operations, requiring detailed knowledge of each subject's personal history and social connections to create false memories that would integrate seamlessly with their existing life narrative. These fabricated recollections needed to account for missing time periods, explain behavioral changes, and provide logical reasons for any evidence of supernatural encounters that might be discovered by family members or friends. The creation of convincing cover stories often required extensive research into subjects' backgrounds, including interviews with family members and associates who were unaware that their loved ones had undergone memory modification. This intelligence gathering was disguised as routine social interaction or professional consultation, with society members adopting civilian identities that allowed them to investigate subjects' lives without arousing suspicion. Perhaps most challengingly, The cover stories needed to be consistent with physical evidence that could not be easily removed or explained away. Photographs of supernatural encounters, written records of anomalous events, or physical artifacts with clearly magical properties all required careful handling to prevent them from triggering memories that had supposedly been erased. The Society developed specialized teams responsible for evidence management, their operations ranging from simple theft of problematic items to elaborate schemes designed to discredit or recontextualize evidence that could not be removed entirely. Photographs were altered using advanced darkroom techniques. Documents were edited or replaced with forgeries, and physical artifacts were either destroyed or replaced with mundane objects that resembled the originals closely enough to avoid detection. The increasing sophistication of these operations required the Society to recruit members with specialized skills far beyond the medical and scientific expertise that had characterized its original membership. Photographers, forgers, locksmiths, and even professional actors were brought into the organization, their talents essential for maintaining the elaborate deceptions necessary to support comprehensive memory modification programs. Training protocols for new Society members became increasingly elaborate as the organization's operations grew more complex and dangerous. Recruits underwent extensive psychological evaluation to ensure their suitability for work that required absolute secrecy and moral flexibility, while technical training covered not only the operation of memory modification equipment, but also surveillance techniques, evidence management, and emergency protocols for situations where operations were discovered or compromised. The Society's growing membership created logistical challenges that required the development of cell-based organizational structures designed to minimize security risks while maintaining operational effectiveness. Members were organized into small groups with limited knowledge of the organization's overall structure, their activities coordinated through intermediaries who reported to leadership councils that remained anonymous to all but the most senior operatives. Communication between cells was accomplished through elaborate systems of coded messages and dead drops that prevented any single security breach from compromising the entire organization. Meeting locations were rotated frequently and selected for their isolation from public observation, while emergency protocols provided for the rapid dissolution and reconstitution of compromised cells without disrupting the Society's broader operations. The development of these sophisticated organizational structures reflected McGuckett's growing understanding that the Society's mission would require decades or perhaps centuries to accomplish fully. The supernatural forces that threatened Gravity Falls showed no signs of diminishing despite the organization's efforts, while the psychological effects of memory modification seemed to require ongoing maintenance and reinforcement to prevent subjects from recovering their erased memories spontaneously. Long-term planning became a central focus of Society leadership, with detailed projections developed for the resources and personnel that would be needed to maintain operations across multiple generations. Succession planning ensured that key positions could be filled by trained replacements if original members became incapacitated, while financial planning provided for the substantial costs associated with maintaining surveillance networks and evidence management capabilities. Yet even as the Society evolved into an increasingly sophisticated and powerful organization, the fundamental questions about its mission remained troubling and unanswered. The memory gun that had been created to heal psychological trauma was producing effects that seemed indistinguishable from the symptoms it had been designed to treat, while the subjects who received treatment showed patterns of cognitive degradation that raised serious questions about whether the cure was worse than the disease. Most troubling of all was the growing evidence that the Society's founder was himself becoming a victim of the technology he had created. His brilliant mind, slowly dissolving under the accumulated effects of years spent operating devices that were proving to be far more dangerous than anyone had initially suspected. The The man who had sacrificed his sanity to protect others from cosmic horror was discovering that his sacrifice might have been not only unnecessary, but actively harmful to the very people he had sought to help. The establishment of the Society of the Blind Eye's surveillance network throughout Gravity Falls represented an undertaking of such scope and ambition that it would have challenged the resources of government intelligence agencies. Yet it was accomplished by a group of dedicated individuals whose commitment to protecting their community from dangerous knowledge overcame every obstacle that conventional wisdom suggested should have made their mission impossible. What began as informal observation of supernatural activity gradually evolved into a comprehensive monitoring system that tracked virtually every aspect of daily life in the town, creating an invisible web of watchers whose presence remained undetected even as their influence shaped events in ways that no resident could have imagined. The network's foundation lay in the strategic placement of human observers throughout every level of Gravity Falls society, individuals whose ordinary occupations and social positions provided natural opportunities to monitor their neighbors, while appearing to engage in nothing more suspicious than normal community interaction. Shop owners observed their customers for signs of psychological distress that might indicate recent supernatural encounters, while teachers watched their students for behavioral changes that could suggest exposure to anomalous phenomena. Postal workers noted unusual correspondence or packages that might contain evidence of paranormal research, while maintenance personnel gained access to private spaces where supernatural artifacts might be hidden or supernatural activities conducted in secret. Each observer underwent extensive training designed to help them recognize subtle indicators of supernatural encounters that untrained individuals might dismiss as ordinary eccentricities or temporary emotional disturbances. Changes in sleep patterns, alterations in social behavior, unusual preoccupations with seemingly random topics, and modifications in daily routines all served as potential warning signs that someone had experienced something beyond the boundaries of normal reality and might require intervention before psychological trauma could develop into more serious mental health problems. The sophistication of this human intelligence network was complemented by technological surveillance capabilities that pushed the boundaries of what 19th century engineering should have been able to achieve. McGuckett's expertise in interdimensional physics had provided insights into electromagnetic phenomena that allowed him to develop monitoring devices far in advance of anything available to law enforcement or military organizations, their capabilities enhanced by principles borrowed from his study of the supernatural forces that permeated the Gravity Falls region. Hidden cameras were installed throughout the town using methods so subtle that even professional security experts would have difficulty detecting their presence. These devices were concealed within ordinary objects that attracted no attention from casual observers, their lenses disguised as decorative elements on buildings, reflection points in storefront windows, or components of street lighting that appeared to serve purely functional purposes. The cameras themselves incorporated image enhancement technology that allowed them to function effectively in low-light conditions while producing recordings of sufficient clarity to identify individuals and document their activities with legal precision. Audio surveillance presented greater challenges due to the need to distinguish between ordinary conversation and discussions that might indicate supernatural encounters. But these obstacles were overcome through the development of advanced signal processing techniques that could isolate and analyze specific types of speech patterns. The monitoring systems were programmed to detect keywords and phrases associated with paranormal phenomena, emotional stress indicators in vocal tones, and conversation patterns that suggested individuals were struggling to understand or communicate experiences that defied conventional explanation. The installation of these surveillance devices required careful coordination with society members who possessed the technical skills and legitimate access necessary to work on buildings and infrastructure without arousing suspicion. Electricians modified wiring systems to provide power for monitoring equipment, while telephone technicians installed additional lines that could carry data streams from remote sensors to centralized processing facilities. Construction workers and maintenance personnel created hidden spaces within walls and foundations where recording equipment could be concealed, their modifications designed to remain undetectable, even during thorough inspections by qualified professionals. Perhaps most remarkably, the society developed mobile surveillance capabilities that allowed them to monitor supernatural activity in the forests and wilderness areas surrounding Gravity Falls, regions where fixed installations would have been impractical, and where some of the most significant paranormal events were likely to occur. These mobile units incorporated technology borrowed from military communications, research, their operators equipped with portable sensors that could detect electromagnetic anomalies associated with supernatural phenomena, while maintaining contact with central command through encrypted radio networks. The data collected through these extensive surveillance operations was processed using analytical techniques that combined traditional intelligence analysis with insights drawn from McGuckett's study of supernatural phenomena. Patterns of activity were tracked and mapped, creating comprehensive databases that allowed society leadership to predict where supernatural events were likely to occur and identify individuals whose behavior suggested they might be prime candidates for paranormal encounters. The society's ability to monitor communications throughout Gravity Falls extended beyond simple eavesdropping to encompass more sophisticated forms of information gathering that took advantage of the community's relatively primitive telecommunications infrastructure. Telephone conversations could be monitored through modifications to the town's central switching equipment, while mail delivery was supervised by postal workers who were society members, capable of identifying correspondence that might contain evidence of supernatural research or communication with other individuals, investigating paranormal phenomena. Radio communications presented unique opportunities for surveillance, since most residents assumed that their conversations over amateur radio networks were too technical or obscure to attract government attention. The society monitored these frequencies continuously, their operators trained to recognize coded language that might be used by amateur researchers attempting to share information about supernatural discoveries without alerting authorities to their activities. The integration of all these surveillance capabilities into a coherent intelligence network required the development of communication protocols and data management systems that could handle enormous volumes of information while maintaining the security necessary to protect society operations from detection. Reports from human observers were collected through a system of coded messages and dead drops that prevented any single security breach from compromising multiple sources, while technical intelligence was transmitted through encrypted channels that appeared to outside observers as routine business communications or personal correspondence. Central processing of surveillance data took place in secure facilities hidden within the museum's expanded basement complex, where society analysts worked around the clock to identify patterns and anomalies that might indicate developing supernatural situations requiring intervention. These analysts were drawn from diverse professional backgrounds that provided them with expertise in fields ranging from psychology and sociology to engineering and natural sciences, their combined knowledge allowing them to interpret intelligence data in ways that no single individual could have accomplished alone. The identification of potential supernatural encounters required sophisticated analytical techniques that could distinguish between genuine paranormal events and ordinary occurrences that might superficially resemble anomalous phenomena. False positives were a constant concern, since unnecessary interventions could expose society operations while wasting resources that were needed for genuine emergencies. Conversely, missed genuine encounters could result in psychological trauma that might have been prevented through timely memory modification, creating public health problems that could eventually attract unwanted attention from outside authorities. To minimize these risks, the Society developed elaborate verification protocols that required multiple independent sources of evidence before any intervention was authorized. Witness reports needed to be corroborated through technical surveillance, while electromagnetic anomalies detected by automated sensors required confirmation through human observation before being classified as genuine supernatural events. Physical evidence was subjected to detailed analysis using scientific techniques that could distinguish between ordinary objects with unusual properties and genuine artifacts of paranormal origin. The Society's growing sophistication in intelligence analysis led to the development of predictive models that could anticipate supernatural activity based on patterns observed over months and years of continuous monitoring. These models incorporated factors ranging from lunar phases and seasonal variations to social conditions and individual psychological profiles, their predictions allowing society leadership to position resources strategically for maximum effectiveness when interventions became necessary. Weather patterns proved to be particularly significant variables in supernatural activity levels, with certain atmospheric conditions seeming to enhance the likelihood of paranormal events while others appeared to suppress them entirely. The Society's meteorological observations led to the development of forecasting techniques that could predict periods of heightened supernatural risk with remarkable accuracy, allowing preventive measures to be implemented before situations developed that would require more dramatic interventions. The relationship between supernatural phenomena and human psychology became another major focus of Society research, with analysts studying how individual personality traits and mental health conditions affected susceptibility to paranormal encounters. Individuals with histories of depression or anxiety proved to be particularly vulnerable to supernatural influence, while those with strong skeptical tendencies seemed to be partially protected by their refusal to acknowledge experiences that challenged their worldviews. These psychological insights led to the development of targeted surveillance programs focused on high-risk individuals who were considered most likely to encounter supernatural phenomena and least equipped to handle the psychological consequences without professional intervention. These subjects received enhanced monitoring that tracked their daily activities, social interactions, and emotional states through methods that appeared to be ordinary community engagement, but actually served sophisticated intelligence-gathering purposes. The Society's surveillance network extended beyond simple observation to encompass active measures designed to influence events in ways that reduced the likelihood of problematic supernatural encounters. Members positioned throughout the community could provide subtle guidance that steered potential victims away from dangerous locations, discouraged investigation of suspicious phenomena, and promoted social activities that kept vulnerable individuals occupied during periods when supernatural activity was predicted to be elevated. Environmental modifications represented another category of preventive measures that the Society employed to reduce supernatural activity levels in areas where complete elimination of paranormal phenomena was considered impractical or impossible. Certain locations throughout Gravity Falls seemed to serve as focal points for supernatural activity, their unique geological or historical characteristics, making them natural gathering places for entities from other dimensions or sources of energy that enhanced paranormal manifestations. Rather than attempting to suppress all supernatural activity in these locations, which might have required resources beyond the society's capabilities or produced unintended consequences that could prove more dangerous than the original problems, the organization developed techniques for subtly altering environmental conditions to reduce the intensity and frequency of paranormal events without eliminating them entirely. These modifications often involved placing specially prepared objects or substances in strategic locations, their properties designed to interfere with the energy fields that seem to enable supernatural manifestations. The success of these environmental interventions required detailed understanding of the physical principles underlying supernatural phenomena, knowledge that the society acquired through years of careful observation and experimentation. McGuckett's background in interdimensional physics proved invaluable for developing theoretical frameworks that could explain paranormal events in terms that suggested possible technological solutions, while field observations provided empirical data that confirmed or refuted theoretical predictions about how various interventions might affect supernatural activity levels. The Society's intelligence operations gradually expanded beyond Gravity Falls itself to encompass monitoring of external threats that might bring unwanted attention to the community's supernatural characteristics. Government agencies, academic researchers, and amateur investigators from other regions all posed potential risks to the Society's mission. Their activities tracked through networks of contacts and informants who could provide early warning of investigations that might threaten the organization's secrecy or the psychological welfare of Gravity Falls residents. Professional researchers represented a particularly significant concern due to their resources and expertise, their investigations potentially capable of discovering evidence that could expose supernatural activity levels that the Society had worked for years to conceal. These individuals required careful monitoring and, when necessary, active measures designed to discredit their research, redirect their attention to other subjects, or, in extreme cases, eliminate their memories of any discoveries that posed threats to community welfare. Government investigations presented different challenges that required different responses, their official nature making them more difficult to suppress through conventional means, while their potential consequences posed far greater risks to both the Society and the community it served. The organization developed contingency plans for dealing with various types of government attention, ranging from routine inspections that could be managed through careful preparation and misdirection, to major investigations that might require the evacuation or memory modification of significant numbers of Society members. The complexity and scope of these surveillance and intervention operations created administrative challenges that pushed the Society's organizational capabilities to their limits. Coordinating the activities of hundreds of observers and agents while maintaining operational security required sophisticated management techniques borrowed from military and intelligence organizations, adapted to account for the unique circumstances of an organization whose existence could never be acknowledged publicly. Personnel management became a constant challenge as the Society grew in size and complexity, with leadership struggling to maintain discipline and operational effectiveness while preventing the formation of factions or power struggles that could compromise organizational unity. Training programs were expanded to cover not only technical skills but also psychological conditioning, designed to strengthen members' commitment to the Society's mission while reducing the likelihood of defection or security breaches. Financial resources presented another ongoing concern as surveillance operations expanded and equipment needs grew more sophisticated, requiring careful management of funding sources that could provide necessary resources without attracting unwanted attention from tax authorities or financial investigators. The society developed diverse income streams that appeared to be legitimate business activities, while actually serving to launder funds used for intelligence operations and equipment purchases. Yet even as the surveillance network achieved levels of sophistication that would have been impressive for any intelligence organization, troubling questions began to emerge about the long-term sustainability and ultimate purpose of such extensive monitoring activities. The system that had been created to protect Gravity Falls residents from supernatural trauma was consuming enormous resources while producing effects that seemed to have little measurable impact on the frequency or severity of paranormal encounters in the region. More disturbing still was the growing evidence that the surveillance network itself was beginning to alter the character of the community it had been designed to protect, creating an atmosphere of subtle but pervasive mistrust that affected social relationships and community cohesion in ways that might prove more harmful than the supernatural phenomena the society sought to suppress. The Watchers were becoming indistinguishable from the threats they monitored, their influence shaping Gravity Falls into something that resembled their vision of a protected community, while destroying the authentic human connections that had made such protection worthwhile. The stories of those whose memories were stolen by the Society of the Blind Eye represent some of the most tragic chapters in the hidden history of Gravity Falls. Each case a testament to the profound arrogance of individuals who believed they possessed the wisdom necessary to decide which experiences deserved to be remembered and which were too dangerous for human consciousness to retain. These were not abstract victims of a philosophical debate about the nature of knowledge, but real people whose lives were fundamentally altered by decisions made in secret by those who claimed to act in their best interests, while systematically destroying the very experiences that had shaped their identities and given meaning to their existence. The Hendricks family had lived in Gravity Falls for 3 generations, their modest home on Gopher Road, serving as a repository of memories that stretched back to the town's earliest days, when logging camps dotted the surrounding forests, and the railroad brought prosperity to communities that had previously existed in virtual isolation from the outside world. Thomas Hendricks worked as a machinist at the lumber mill, his skilled hands capable of repairing equipment that kept the town's economy functioning, while his wife Mary tended their small garden and raised their 2 children with the patient dedication that characterized families who understood the value of simple pleasures and honest work. Their encounter with the supernatural began on a warm evening in late summer of 1984, when strange lights appeared in the sky above their property with a brilliance that seemed to transform night into day. The family had been enjoying dinner on their back porch when the phenomenon began, their conversation interrupted by illuminations so intense that it cast sharp shadows despite the absence of any visible light source. The lights moved with apparent intelligence, forming geometric patterns that suggested some form of communication attempt while generating harmonics that could be felt as physical vibrations in the ground beneath their feet. Thomas, whose practical nature had been shaped by years of working with machinery that followed predictable physical laws, initially assumed that the lights were some form of military aircraft conducting exercises in the restricted airspace above the national forest. Yet as the minutes passed and the patterns became increasingly complex, he found himself forced to acknowledge that no human technology could account for what they were witnessing. The lights seemed to respond to their presence, shifting configurations when family members moved or spoke, as if whatever intelligence controlled them was studying the humans with the same fascination they felt while observing the display. Mary felt a profound sense of peace washing over her as she watched the celestial dance, her usual anxieties about household concerns and family responsibilities fading into insignificance compared to the overwhelming beauty of what appeared to be first contact between humanity and a benevolent alien civilization. She found herself thinking about cosmic questions that had never occurred to her before, wondering about the vast distances these visitors must have traveled, and the advanced knowledge they might be willing to share with primitive Earth dwellers who had barely begun to understand their place in the universe. Their children, 8-year-old Timothy and 12-year-old Sarah, reacted with the wonder and excitement that only young minds can experience when confronted with phenomena that exceed every boundary of their previous experience. Timothy clapped his hands and laughed with delight as the lights responded by forming spirals and flowers that seemed designed specifically to entertain him, while Sarah began asking questions about physics and astronomy that revealed an intelligence far beyond her years. Her developing mind, making connections between the display and scientific principles she had never formally studied. The encounter lasted for nearly 2 hours, during which time the family felt themselves becoming part of something larger and more significant than their individual lives had ever encompassed. The lights seemed to be attempting communication through patterns of color and movement that bypassed language entirely, conveying concepts and emotions directly into their consciousness through means that transcended normal sensory perception. They experienced shared visions of distant worlds where crystalline cities reached toward foreign stars, where beings of pure energy danced through dimensions that human mathematics had never imagined, and where love and understanding flowed between species separated by vast gulfs of space and evolutionary development. When the lights finally faded and normal darkness returned to their backyard, the Hendricks family found themselves changed in ways that none of them could adequately express. They had been granted a glimpse of cosmic truth that rendered their ordinary concerns trivial while filling them with purpose they had never experienced before. Thomas quit his job at the lumber mill and began studying astronomy and physics with an obsession that consumed every spare moment. His workshop filling with telescopes and radio equipment designed to detect signs of alien communication. Mary started a journal documenting their experience and began corresponding with researchers around the world who were investigating similar phenomena, her letters describing technical details that she should not have possessed the knowledge to understand. The children's behavior underwent equally dramatic transformations that reflected their exposure to knowledge beyond their years. Timothy began drawing pictures of spacecraft and alien beings with an accuracy and attention to detail that suggested direct observation rather than childhood imagination, while Sarah's academic performance improved so dramatically that her teachers suspected her of cheating until they realized that she was somehow genuinely understanding advanced mathematical concepts that were not taught until college level. For several months, the family lived in a state of euphoric expectation, their lives organized around the possibility that their cosmic visitors might return with additional revelations or perhaps an invitation to join them in exploring the wonders of the universe. They spent countless evenings on their back porch scanning the skies for signs of renewed contact, their conversations filled with speculation about the advanced civilizations that must exist throughout the galaxy and the role that humanity might play in a cosmic community of intelligent species. Yet their happiness and sense of purpose made them ideal targets for the Society of the Blind Eye's intervention protocols. Their obvious psychological transformation and growing public discussions of their experience, creating exactly the kind of situation that McGuckett's organization had been designed to prevent. Society surveillance had detected the initial encounter through electromagnetic sensors that registered the powerful energy fields generated by the mysterious lights, while subsequent monitoring of the family's activities revealed behavior patterns that suggested successful contact with genuinely supernatural entities. The decision to intervene was made at the highest levels of society, leadership, with McGucket himself reviewing the case files and concluding that the Hendricks family's experience represented a clear threat to community psychological welfare that required comprehensive memory modification to prevent widespread panic about alien visitation. The family's openness about their encounter and their enthusiasm for sharing details with neighbors and friends created risks of psychological contagion that could spread throughout Gravity Falls if not addressed through immediate and decisive action. The intervention was planned with military precision, society operatives conducting extensive surveillance of the family's routines and social connections to identify optimal timing and locations for the memory erasure procedures. Thomas and Mary would need to be treated simultaneously to prevent one spouse from attempting to restore the other's memories, while the children required special protocols designed to account for their developmental stages and the particular vulnerability of young minds to traumatic memory modification. On a quiet Tuesday evening in early October, when autumn leaves were beginning to turn and the first frost warnings had been issued for the mountain valleys, society operatives approached the Hendricks home under cover of darkness, with equipment that would allow them to perform the necessary procedures without alerting neighbors or leaving physical evidence that might raise questions about what had occurred. The family was sedated using advanced chemical compounds that induced unconsciousness so quickly and thoroughly that none of them had time to register what was happening, their bodies carefully positioned to avoid suspicion when they eventually awakened. The memory erasure procedures required nearly 6 hours to complete, with each family member receiving individually calibrated treatments designed to remove not only their recollections of the alien encounter, but also the subsequent months of research and speculation that had been inspired by that experience. Thomas lost his newfound interest in astronomy and physics. His workshop cleared of equipment, while false memories were implanted to explain the missing time and altered behavior patterns that his wife and co-workers might otherwise have found suspicious. Mary's correspondence with UFO researchers was terminated through forged letters explaining that she had lost interest in the subject, while her journal documenting the encounter was replaced with innocuous records of household activities and family events that provided plausible explanations for her previous enthusiasm and secretive behavior. The children's advanced knowledge and artistic representations of alien beings were erased along with the experiences that had generated them. Their cognitive development artificially returned to levels appropriate for their ages. When the Hendricks family awakened the following morning, they found themselves unable to account for several months of their recent past, their memories filled with generic recollections of ordinary family activities that felt somehow hollow and unsatisfying despite their apparent normalcy. Thomas returned to his job at the lumber mill with no memory of having quit, while Mary resumed her household routines with a vague sense that something important had been lost, but no clear understanding of what that might have been. The children adapted to their altered memories with the resilience that young minds typically display when faced with confusion they cannot resolve. Yet both Timothy and Sarah experienced persistent dreams filled with images of lights and otherworldly beings that seemed to represent something precious that had been taken away from them. Their academic performance declined to previous levels, while their artwork reverted to typical childhood themes that lacked the sophisticated detail and cosmic perspective that had characterized their post-encounter creations. The success of the Hendricks intervention, measured by society standards that prioritize psychological stability over individual autonomy, encouraged similar actions against other residents whose supernatural encounters had produced behavioral changes deemed problematic by organization leadership. Dr. Rebecca Castellanos, a retired professor of anthropology who had moved to Gravity Falls seeking peaceful isolation for her academic writing, became another target for memory modification after her investigations into local folklore began producing evidence of genuine supernatural activity that predated the town's official historical records by centuries. Dr. Castellanos had come to Gravity Falls with impressive credentials and a lifetime of experience, studying primitive cultures whose belief systems often incorporated elements that mainstream academia dismissed as superstition and mythological thinking. Yet, her scholarly background proved to be inadequate preparation for encounters with phenomena that challenged the fundamental assumptions of rational scientific inquiry, leaving her struggling to maintain professional objectivity while documenting evidence that suggested the existence of forces and entities that conventional anthropology insisted could not exist. Her research had begun innocuously enough, with interviews of elderly residents who remembered stories passed down from the town's earliest settlers about strange occurrences in the surrounding wilderness. These accounts initially seemed to follow familiar patterns found in frontier communities throughout North America, tales of unusual wildlife behavior and unexplained natural phenomena that reflected the psychological stresses of life in isolated environments where human civilization existed in precarious balance with untamed wilderness. Yet, as her investigation progressed, Dr. Castellanos began to notice consistencies in the folklore that suggested something more substantial than collective imagination or cultural transmission of fictional narratives. Multiple independent sources described encounters with specific entities that appeared repeatedly across generations, their descriptions too detailed and consistent to be dismissed as variations on common mythological themes. Physical evidence occasionally supported these accounts, with photographs, artifacts, and even environmental changes that corroborated witness testimony in ways that demanded serious scientific consideration. Her academic training compelled her to document these findings with scholarly rigor, her research notes filling multiple notebooks with detailed observations and analysis that treated supernatural encounters as legitimate subjects for anthropological study rather than curiosities to be dismissed or explained away. She began developing theoretical frameworks that could accommodate paranormal phenomena within existing scientific paradigms, her work potentially revolutionary in its implications for fields ranging from psychology to physics. The transformation of a respected academic into an advocate for supernatural reality created exactly the kind of situation that the Society of the Blind Eye had been designed to prevent, her research threatening to provide scholarly legitimacy for beliefs that the organization considered psychologically dangerous for ordinary citizens to embrace. Dr. Castellanos' credentials and publication record made her potentially capable of reaching audiences far beyond Gravity Falls, her work possibly serving as a catalyst for broader scientific investigation of paranormal phenomena that could expose supernatural activity levels throughout the region. The Society's intervention began with subtle attempts to discourage her research through misdirection and false information designed to lead her investigations away from genuinely supernatural phenomena toward more conventional explanations for the unusual accounts she had collected. Society members posed as helpful local historians who provided alternative interpretations of the folklore she was studying, their suggestions emphasizing psychological and sociological factors that could account for supernatural beliefs without requiring acceptance of genuinely anomalous events. When these indirect methods proved insufficient to deter her investigation, the Society escalated to more aggressive tactics that included theft of her research materials and intimidation, designed to convince her that continued study of local supernatural phenomena posed risks to her personal safety. Anonymous warnings appeared under her door, suggesting that her questions were attracting unwanted attention from individuals who preferred that certain subjects remain unexplored, while subtle acts of vandalism created an atmosphere of menace that was intended to encourage her departure from Gravity Falls. Yet Dr. Castellanos' academic integrity and natural curiosity proved stronger than these psychological pressures. Her determination to complete her research actually strengthened by evidence that someone was actively working to prevent her from uncovering whatever truths lay hidden in the town's supernatural heritage. She began taking additional precautions to protect her work, making copies of important documents and storing them in secure locations, while adopting more covert methods of investigation that reduced her visibility to whoever was monitoring her activities. The Society's final intervention required the deployment of their most sophisticated memory modification protocols, with Dr. Castellanos receiving treatment designed not only to erase her recollections of supernatural encounters, but to fundamentally alter her academic interests and professional goals. The procedure was complicated by her advanced education and analytical thinking patterns, which made her naturally resistant to false memory implantation and more likely to notice inconsistencies in her modified recollections. The memory gun sessions required multiple treatments spread across several weeks, with each procedure carefully calibrated to remove specific aspects of her research while preserving enough academic knowledge to maintain her professional competence in areas unrelated to supernatural studies. Her notebooks were replaced with fabricated research, focusing on conventional, anthropological subjects, while her correspondence with academic colleagues was edited to eliminate any references to paranormal phenomena or unusual discoveries in Gravity Falls. When the treatments were complete, Dr. Castellanos found herself unable to explain why she had chosen to spend months in such a remote location or what she had hoped to accomplish through her research into local folklore. Her modified memories suggested that she had been working on a comparative study of frontier settlement patterns that had somehow lost its focus and direction, leaving her with research materials that seemed irrelevant to any coherent academic purpose. The psychological impact of these extensive memory modifications was severe, with Dr. Castellanos experiencing persistent feelings of confusion and intellectual inadequacy that undermined her confidence in her professional abilities. She abandoned her research and left Gravity Falls within weeks of the final treatment, her departure representing another successful intervention by society standards, while actually destroying the career and identity of a distinguished scholar whose only crime had been excessive curiosity about subjects that others preferred to keep hidden. These cases represented merely the most dramatic examples of the Society's impact on individual lives, with hundreds of other residents receiving memory modifications that were less extensive but equally profound in their effects on personal identity and psychological well-being. Children who had formed friendships with supernatural entities found themselves unable to understand why they felt such persistent loneliness, their invisible companions erased from memory, while the emotional bonds that had sustained those relationships remained as inexplicable sources of grief and loss. Elderly residents who had maintained communication with deceased family members through supernatural means were left to face their grief without the comfort that had helped them cope with loss, their memories of posthumous conversations replaced with conventional recollections that provided no explanation for the peace and closure they had previously experienced. Artists and writers whose work had been inspired by supernatural encounters found their creativity diminished, their most meaningful creations seeming suddenly hollow and meaningless, while the experiences that had generated them remained inaccessible to conscious recollection. The cumulative effect of these interventions was the creation of a community whose residents lived in a state of subtle but pervasive psychological diminishment, Their authentic experiences systematically replaced with sanitized memories that conformed to narrow definitions of acceptable reality, while leaving them feeling somehow incomplete and disconnected from sources of meaning that they could no longer identify or understand. The society that claimed to protect Gravity Falls from dangerous knowledge had created a town populated by people who had been robbed of their most significant experiences, their stolen memories replaced with comfortable lies that concealed the price of such protection from both the victims and those who claimed to serve their best interests. The gradual deterioration of Fiddleford McGucket's brilliant mind represented perhaps the most tragic irony in the entire history of the Society of the Blind Eye, a living demonstration of the fundamental flaw in an organization that had been founded on the premise that some knowledge was too dangerous for human consciousness to retain. The man whose genius had created the technology that promised to liberate others from the burden of traumatic memories became the ultimate victim of his own invention, his identity slowly dissolving under the accumulated effects of repeated memory erasure, until the brilliant scientist who had arrived in Gravity Falls was transformed into a hollow shell that bore only superficial resemblance to the person he had once been. The descent began so gradually that even McGucket himself failed to recognize the warning signs, until the damage had progressed far beyond any possibility of reversal or repair. In the early stages of the Society's operation, when the memory gun was used sparingly and only for specific traumatic experiences, the cognitive side effects seemed minimal and temporary, producing nothing more concerning than brief periods of disorientation that could easily be attributed to the natural stress of operating complex technology under challenging circumstances. McGucket's initial response to these minor symptoms was characteristic of his scientific temperament, treating them as interesting phenomena to be studied rather than warning signs of developing problems that required immediate attention and intervention. He began keeping detailed records of his own cognitive function, documenting changes in memory, concentration, and analytical ability with the same methodical approach he had once applied to interdimensional physics research, his notebooks filling with observations that revealed patterns of decline that should have alarmed anyone capable of interpreting their implications objectively. Yet the very nature of memory-related cognitive damage made objective self-assessment increasingly difficult as the condition progressed, creating a feedback loop where McGucket's diminishing mental capacity made him less capable of recognizing the extent of his deterioration. The scientist who had once been capable of detecting subtle flaws in complex theoretical frameworks found himself unable to notice obvious inconsistencies in his own behavior and thinking patterns, his analytical skills eroding at the same pace as the memories that had provided the foundation for those abilities. The first major warning sign came during the spring of 1985, when McGucket attempted to perform routine maintenance on the memory gun's electromagnetic pulse generators and discovered that he could no longer remember the theoretical principles underlying their design and construction. The equations that had once flowed from his mind with effortless clarity now seemed like foreign languages written in symbols he recognized, but could no longer decode, their meanings as inaccessible as if they had been created by someone else entirely. His initial assumption was that the problem represented temporary mental fatigue brought on by months of intensive work, establishing the Society's operational procedures and training new members in the complex techniques required for successful memory modification. He attempted to refresh his understanding by reviewing the technical documentation he had created during the memory gun's development, only to discover that even his own written explanations seemed incomprehensible, filled with concepts and terminology that felt simultaneously familiar and utterly alien. The realization that his intellectual capabilities were diminishing rather than merely temporarily impaired filled McGucket with a terror that exceeded even his original fear of the cosmic horrors he had glimpsed through Stanford's interdimensional portal. The loss of mental acuity represented not just a practical problem, but an existential crisis that challenged his fundamental understanding of who he was and what made his life meaningful. His identity having been built around intellectual achievements that were apparently as fragile as any other form of memory. His response to this crisis revealed both the depth of his addiction to memory erasure and the tragic irony of his situation. Rather than seeking help or attempting to understand the source of his cognitive decline, McGucket's first instinct was to use the memory gun to erase his awareness of the problem, removing his recollections of intellectual confusion and replacing them with false memories that suggested his mental faculties remained intact and functioning normally. The temporary relief provided by this self-administered treatment only accelerated his decline by eliminating the psychological motivation that might have driven him to seek solutions or implement protective measures. With his awareness of cognitive problems erased, McGucket continued using the memory gun with the same frequency and intensity that had characterized his previous patterns, each additional treatment contributing to cumulative damage that he was no longer capable of recognizing or measuring. The society members who worked most closely with McGucket began noticing changes in his behavior and decision-making capabilities that suggested serious underlying problems. Yet their attempts to address these concerns were complicated by the founder's continued ability to function effectively in familiar situations, while displaying profound deficits when confronted with novel challenges or complex, analytical tasks. His social skills and basic personality traits remained largely intact, creating an illusion of normalcy that concealed the extent of his intellectual deterioration from casual observers. More troubling still was McGucket's apparent inability to recognize when he had reached the limits of his diminished capabilities, his confidence in his own judgment remaining unaffected even as that judgment became increasingly unreliable and potentially dangerous. He continued making technical decisions about memory gun modifications and operational procedures despite having lost much of the specialized knowledge necessary to evaluate the consequences of those decisions, his pronouncements carrying the authority of his reputation, while actually reflecting cognitive processes that were no longer capable of supporting such complex reasoning. The society's leadership found themselves facing an impossible dilemma as they watched their founder's condition deteriorate. Confronting McGucket directly about his cognitive decline would require them to challenge the judgment and authority of the person whose vision and expertise had created their organization, potentially triggering resistance or defensive reactions that could compromise operational security. Yet allowing his deterioration to continue unchecked posed risks to both McGucket's welfare and the society's mission. His increasingly erratic decision-making, potentially exposing them to discovery or creating situations that could endanger both members and subjects. The gradual shift in organizational dynamics that resulted from McGucket's decline created opportunities for other society members to assume greater responsibility and influence within the group's power structure. These individuals, many of whom had joined the organization during its early expansion phases, possessed valuable skills and experience, but lacked the comprehensive understanding of the society's theoretical foundations that had guided McGucket's original vision. Their perspectives shaped more by operational concerns than by the philosophical principles that had originally motivated the memory gun's development. As these newer leaders gained influence over society operations, subtle changes began appearing in the organization's priorities and methods that reflected different interpretations of its mission and acceptable techniques for achieving its goals. The careful restraint that had characterized early memory modification procedures gave way to more aggressive interventions that prioritized operational efficiency over individual welfare, while the philosophical commitment to protecting people from dangerous knowledge evolved into a more pragmatic focus on maintaining social stability, regardless of the personal costs to intervention subjects. McGuckett's awareness of these changes was limited by his deteriorating ability to process complex information and maintain consistent oversight of organizational activities. His attention span shortened, and his memory for recent events so unreliable that he often forgot about problems or concerns within hours of learning about them. The society meetings that had once featured intense discussions of ethical principles and operational procedures became increasingly perfunctory affairs where McGuckett's presence was more ceremonial than substantive, his contributions consisting primarily of general encouragement rather than specific technical guidance or strategic direction. The transformation of the society's founder from brilliant visionary to ineffective figurehead was perhaps most tragically evident in his attempts to continue contributing to the organization's technical development despite having lost most of the expertise that had originally made such contribution possible. His proposals for memory gun improvements were based on fragmentary recollections of theoretical principles he could no longer fully understand, while his diagnostic assessments of equipment problems often resulted in repairs that created more serious malfunctions than they resolved. Yet even as his intellectual capabilities diminished, McGuckett retained enough awareness of his situation to experience profound anxiety about his changing relationship with the organization he had created. The society had become the primary source of meaning and purpose in his life, providing social connections and professional identity that partially compensated for the personal relationships and academic achievements that had been erased along with the traumatic memories they had contained. The possibility of losing this remaining source of significance filled him with desperation that drove him to conceal the extent of his deterioration even from those who might have been willing to help. This desperate desire to maintain his position within the society led McGuckett to rely increasingly on deception and misdirection to conceal his cognitive limitations, developing elaborate strategies for avoiding situations where his intellectual deficits would become obvious while creating false impressions of continued competence and leadership capability. He became skilled at redirecting conversations away from technical subjects he could no longer understand, while his responses to direct questions became increasingly vague and non-committal as he lost the ability to form coherent opinions about complex issues. The psychological stress of maintaining these deceptions while experiencing the ongoing loss of mental capabilities created a feedback loop that accelerated McGuckett's decline by consuming cognitive resources that might otherwise have been preserved for essential functions. The energy required to remember which subjects he needed to avoid and which false impressions he needed to maintain left less mental capacity available for the analytical thinking that had once been his greatest strength, while the constant anxiety about discovery created emotional instability that further undermined his remaining intellectual abilities. As his condition worsened, McGuckett began experiencing episodes of profound disorientation where he would find himself in familiar locations with no memory of how he had arrived there or what he had intended to accomplish. His sense of personal continuity, disrupted by gaps in his recollection that could span hours or even entire days. These episodes were particularly dangerous when they occurred during society operations, creating situations where the founder's unpredictable behavior could compromise security or endanger both members and subjects who depended on his expertise and leadership. The society's response to these incidents revealed the extent to which organizational priorities had shifted away from individual welfare toward operational concerns, with leadership more focused on containing the potential security risks created by McGuckett's condition than on providing appropriate care for the founder whose sacrifices had made their mission possible. Rather than seeking medical help or attempting to understand the underlying causes of his deterioration, they developed protocols for monitoring and managing his behavior that treated him more like a security threat than a valued colleague suffering from a work-related disability. The isolation that resulted from these management protocols only accelerated McGuckett's decline by depriving him of the social interactions and intellectual stimulation that might have helped preserve his remaining cognitive abilities. Cut off from meaningful participation in society operations and increasingly unable to maintain normal relationships with people outside the organization, he found himself trapped in a social environment where his diminishing capabilities were viewed as problems to be managed rather than symptoms of a condition that deserved compassion and appropriate treatment. The final stages of McGuckett's transformation from brilliant scientist to the eccentric hermit, who would become known throughout Gravity Falls as Old Man McGuckett, occurred with heartbreaking rapidity once his cognitive decline reached a critical threshold where compensatory mechanisms could no longer conceal the extent of his deterioration. The carefully maintained facade of intellectual competence collapsed entirely, revealing a person whose memory and analytical abilities had been so thoroughly compromised that he could no longer perform basic tasks of daily living without assistance and supervision. His speech patterns became increasingly incoherent, as the language centers of his brain were affected by the cumulative damage from repeated memory erasure. His once eloquent explanations of complex scientific principles reduced to fragments of technical jargon, mixed with nonsensical associations that reflected the random neural connections created by electromagnetic interference with normal brain function. His ability to recognize familiar people and places fluctuated unpredictably, creating situations where he would treat longtime colleagues as strangers while addressing complete strangers as old friends whose names he could not remember. Perhaps most tragically, McGuckett retained just enough self-awareness to understand that something fundamental had been lost. His moments of clarity filled with anguish over abilities and memories that he could sense were missing, but could not specifically identify or recover. These brief episodes of partial insight into his condition were perhaps more painful than complete oblivion would have been, offering glimpses of the person he had once been, while making clear that restoration was impossible and further decline inevitable. The society's leadership faced the difficult decision of what to do with their founder, as his condition deteriorated beyond any possibility of continued participation in organizational activities. The man who had created the technology and philosophy that defined their mission had become a living reminder of the costs associated with memory modification, his presence serving as uncomfortable evidence that their methods carried risks far greater than they had been willing to acknowledge publicly or even privately among themselves. Their ultimate decision to allow McGuckett to drift away from the organization while providing minimal support for his basic needs reflected both practical concerns about operational security and deeper psychological discomfort with confronting the implications of his fate for their own future prospects. By treating his decline as an unfortunate but unforeseeable accident, rather than a predictable consequence of prolonged exposure to memory-modifying technology, They were able to continue their operations while avoiding uncomfortable questions about whether they were creating similar risks for themselves and their subjects. The transformation of Fiddleford McGucket from visionary scientist to marginalized eccentric became a cautionary tale that the Society of the Blind Eye worked desperately to suppress, his condition serving as evidence that their methods carried costs that could not be justified by any conceivable benefits to community welfare or individual psychological health. Yet the very nature of their organization made it impossible to acknowledge these costs publicly or even privately, creating a conspiracy of silence that ensured McGucket's sacrifice would remain hidden from history, while the technology he had created continued claiming new victims whose suffering would be equally invisible and equally ignored. The arrival of Dipper and Mabel Pines in Gravity Falls during the summer of 2012 represented a fundamental disruption to the carefully maintained equilibrium that the Society of the Blind Eye had spent nearly 3 decades establishing and protecting. These 12-year-old twins from California brought with them not only the natural curiosity and resilience of youth, but also a complete absence of the psychological conditioning that had gradually shaped the behavior patterns of long-term Gravity Falls residents. Their minds unencumbered by the subtle influences and selective memory modifications that had made the local population so remarkably accepting of rational explanations for obviously supernatural phenomena. The Society's intelligence network detected the twins' presence within hours of their arrival at the Mystery Shack, their surveillance systems automatically flagging any new residents who might pose risks to operational security or prove vulnerable to supernatural encounters that could require intervention. The initial assessment classified Dipper and Mabel as low-priority subjects, whose brief summer visit was unlikely to generate significant exposure to anomalous phenomena. Their temporary status and presumed urban background suggesting they would remain safely within the tourist areas where supernatural activity was carefully managed and controlled. Yet within days of their arrival, reports began filtering through Society communication channels that suggested these initial assessments had been dangerously inadequate. The twins were displaying behavior patterns that indicated not only direct encounters with supernatural entities, but also successful adaptation to those encounters without the psychological trauma that typically required memory modification to prevent long-term mental health problems. More troubling still, they seemed to be actively seeking additional supernatural experiences rather than avoiding them, their investigations guided by systematic approaches that suggested access to information sources that should not have existed. The discovery that Dipper had somehow obtained one of the 3 journals documenting Stanford Pine's supernatural research represented a security breach of catastrophic proportions, threatening to expose decades of carefully concealed information about Gravity Falls' paranormal characteristics, while providing detailed guidance for investigating phenomena that the Society had worked tirelessly to keep hidden from public awareness. The journal's existence had been known to Society leadership, but its location had been assumed to be secure within Stanford's abandoned research facility, where casual discovery would have been virtually impossible. Surveillance footage revealed that Dipper was not merely reading the journal, but actively using its contents to guide systematic exploration of supernatural phenomena throughout the Gravity Falls region. His investigations displaying sophistication and determination that exceeded the capabilities of most adult researchers who had attempted similar studies in the past. The boys' analytical approach to documenting anomalous events and testing theoretical explanations suggested intellectual gifts that made him far more dangerous to Society operations than his age would typically indicate. Mabel's role in these investigations initially appeared to be supportive rather than leadership-oriented. Her contributions focused on social interactions and creative problem-solving, rather than the systematic research that characterized her brother's approach. Yet society analysts recognized that her emotional intelligence and natural charisma made her equally threatening to their mission in different ways. Her ability to form rapid connections with both human and supernatural entities, providing access to information sources that more conventional investigators would never be able to develop. The twins' growing knowledge of Gravity Falls' supernatural characteristics created immediate operational challenges that required careful consideration of response options ranging from enhanced surveillance to direct intervention through memory modification procedures. The decision-making process was complicated by their age, which made aggressive intervention potentially problematic from both ethical and practical perspectives, while their temporary residential status suggested that patients might allow the problem to resolve itself through their natural departure at summer's end. Yet even as society leadership debated appropriate responses to the twins' presence, additional intelligence reports revealed that their supernatural encounters were escalating in both frequency and significance. Their investigations apparently attracting the attention of entities and phenomena that had previously remained dormant or carefully concealed. The journal that guided Dipper's research contained information that could lead him to discovery of society operations, while the twins' obvious success in dealing with supernatural threats made them potential catalysts for increased paranormal activity throughout the region. The situation became critical when surveillance detected the twins' investigation of the abandoned convenience store where supernatural activity had been suppressed through years of careful environmental modification and strategic memory erasures. Their success in identifying and interacting with entities that society operatives had spent months neutralizing demonstrated capabilities that exceeded professional paranormal researchers, while their apparent immunity to psychological trauma suggested either exceptional mental resilience or exposure to conditioning techniques that should not have been available to civilian investigators. Perhaps most alarming was evidence that the twins were developing social connections with other Gravity Falls residents who had been previous subjects of memory modification procedures, their interactions apparently triggering spontaneous recovery of erased memories in individuals who should have been permanently protected from awareness of their supernatural experiences. The memory gun's effects, which had been assumed to be irreversible under normal circumstances, appeared to be vulnerable to disruption through social influences that the society's theoretical frameworks had not anticipated or prepared for. The twins' relationship with their great-uncle Stanford, known to the community as the mysterious proprietor of the Mystery Shack tourist attraction, added additional layers of complexity to the situation. Society records indicated that Stanford Pines had been the subject of extensive surveillance during his years of supernatural research, his activities monitored, but not directly interfered with, due to his apparent cooperation with certain restraints on public disclosure of his discoveries. His sudden disappearance decades earlier had been assumed to represent either voluntary relocation or elimination through supernatural means. His abandoned research facility, sealed and monitored, but not thoroughly investigated due to risks associated with the advanced technology it contained. The revelation that Stanford had a family member caring for his property and business interests suggested possibilities for renewed research activity that could pose existential threats to society operations, particularly if that family member retained access to research materials or technological resources that had been developed during the original supernatural investigation projects. The twins' presence in the Mystery Shack provided them with potential access to information and equipment that could amplify their investigative capabilities, far beyond what their age and experience would normally suggest. society intelligence efforts intensified dramatically as leadership recognized the scope of the threat posed by the twins' continued residence in Gravity Falls. Surveillance resources diverted from other operations to provide comprehensive monitoring of their activities and associations. The twins' daily routines were documented in exhaustive detail, their conversations recorded and analyzed for evidence of supernatural knowledge or plans for additional investigations that might require preemptive intervention. The sophistication of these surveillance operations revealed disturbing patterns in the twins' behavior that suggested they were aware of being watched and had developed countermeasures designed to conceal their most sensitive activities from outside observation. Their public behavior displayed the innocuous characteristics expected from normal children enjoying summer vacation, yet their private communications and covert activities indicated ongoing supernatural research that was both systematic and increasingly successful. More troubling still was evidence that the twins were developing relationships with supernatural entities that could provide them with information and assistance beyond anything available through conventional research methods. Their interactions with these entities appeared to be cooperative rather than adversarial, suggesting a level of trust and mutual understanding that challenged fundamental assumptions about human supernatural relationships that had guided society policy for decades. The twins' investigation of society operations began subtly, with seemingly innocent questions about local history and community organizations that gradually revealed knowledge of sensitive information that should not have been accessible to outsiders. Their inquiries about the museum's educational programs and historical exhibits demonstrated awareness of the building's significance that could only have come from sources with detailed knowledge of society activities, while their interest in local folklore and unexplained phenomena suggested systematic research into subjects that the society had worked for years to suppress. As summer progressed and the twins' investigations continued expanding in scope and sophistication, society leadership found themselves facing decisions that would fundamentally alter the organization's relationship with the community it claimed to protect. The twins represented a new category of threat that existing protocols had not anticipated, their youth making aggressive intervention problematic, while their capabilities made passive monitoring increasingly inadequate as a response strategy. The development of specific intervention plans targeting the twins required careful consideration of factors that had never been relevant to previous operations. Their temporary residential status, creating time constraints that limited options for gradual influence or subtle redirection. Traditional memory modification procedures would need to be adapted to account for their demonstrated resistance to psychological manipulation, while the social connections they had developed within the community made isolated intervention potentially ineffective if supporting relationships could trigger memory recovery. Perhaps most significantly, the twins' investigation of supernatural phenomena had attracted attention from entities and forces that existed beyond the society's ability to monitor or control. Their success in dealing with genuinely dangerous threats, suggesting capabilities that might be essential for community protection in ways that the society's methods could not replicate. The possibility that the twins represented assets rather than threats forced leadership to reconsider fundamental assumptions about their mission and the techniques necessary for achieving their goals. The internal debates that consumed society leadership during the latter part of the summer revealed deep philosophical divisions within the organization about appropriate responses to challenges that exceeded their established operational parameters. Some members advocated for immediate and aggressive intervention, designed to neutralize the twins' threat through comprehensive memory modification, regardless of ethical concerns, while others argued for cooperation or even recruitment approaches that could harness their capabilities for society purposes. These debates were complicated by growing evidence that the society's traditional methods were becoming less effective as community awareness of supernatural phenomena increased through the twins' influence and activities. Memory modification procedures that had been reliable for decades were producing incomplete results that left subjects with persistent questions and emotional residues that made them more, rather than less likely to seek additional, supernatural encounters. The escalating tension between society leadership and the unprecedented challenges posed by the twins' presence created an atmosphere of crisis that affected all aspects of organizational operations. Resources diverted from routine activities to address threats that seemed to multiply faster than responses could be developed. The careful equilibrium that had defined Gravity Falls' supernatural environment for nearly 3 decades was beginning to collapse under pressures that the society's founders had never anticipated and for which their successors had no adequate preparation. As autumn approached and the twins' scheduled departure grew imminent, society surveillance detected planning activities that suggested their summer experiences had inspired long-term commitments to supernatural research that would continue beyond their departure from Gravity Falls. The possibility that they would return or maintain remote investigation of local phenomena created ongoing security risks that could not be resolved through temporary measures, while their demonstrated ability to influence other community members suggested potential for cascading effects that could compromise decades of carefully constructed social conditioning. The decision to take direct action against the twins was ultimately forced by intelligence, indicating that their investigations had led them to discover specific information about society operations that posed immediate threats to organizational security and member safety. The twins' knowledge of the museum's secret facilities and their apparent understanding of memory modification techniques created situations that could not be resolved through passive monitoring or indirect influence, requiring comprehensive intervention that would eliminate their threat permanently while preserving community stability and organizational secrecy. The planning for this intervention represented the most complex and dangerous operation the society had ever attempted, requiring coordination of resources and personnel that pushed the organization to its operational limits while accepting risks that could compromise everything they had worked for decades to achieve. The twins' youth and innocence made them sympathetic subjects whose treatment would test the moral foundations of an organization that claimed to act in the best interests of those it sought to control, while their demonstrated capabilities made them genuinely dangerous opponents whose resistance could expose society operations to unprecedented public scrutiny. The confrontation between Dipper and Mabel Pines and the Society of the Blind Eye began with the kind of deceptive tranquility that often precedes the most dramatic reversals of fortune. The autumn afternoon, carrying no hint of the revelations that would shatter decades of carefully maintained secrecy and transform the fundamental relationship between Gravity Falls residents and the supernatural forces that had shaped their community's hidden history. The twins had spent weeks following leads that seemed to point toward a conspiracy involving missing memories and altered recollections, their investigation guided by journal entries that described phenomena which numerous townspeople claimed never to have experienced, despite evidence suggesting otherwise. The breakthrough came through Lazy Susan, whose cheerful demeanor and reputation for scatterbrained conversation had made her an ideal subject for memory modification procedures over the years. Her frequent encounters with supernatural phenomena, requiring regular intervention to prevent psychological trauma that could have affected her ability to operate the local diner that served as an important social gathering place for community members. Yet the twins' gentle questioning about unusual events and missing time periods had somehow triggered partial recovery of memories that society operatives had assumed were permanently erased, her fragmented recollections providing crucial clues about the existence of an organization dedicated to stealing people's most significant experiences. The twins' investigation led them through a maze of half-remembered encounters and altered testimonies that painted a picture of systematic memory manipulation affecting virtually every long-term resident of Gravity Falls, the scope of the conspiracy far exceeding anything they had previously imagined possible in their small-town setting. Witnesses who should have had vivid recollections of supernatural encounters instead displayed gaps and inconsistencies that suggested artificial modification, while physical evidence of paranormal activity existed in locations where no one claimed to remember anything unusual occurring. The crucial breakthrough came when Dipper discovered the connection between these memory anomalies and the Gravity Falls Museum of History, his systematic analysis of witness accounts, revealing that virtually everyone who had experienced suspicious memory problems had visited the museum within days of their reported supernatural encounters. The building that presented itself as a repository of local history and culture was clearly serving some other purpose, its legitimate educational mission, providing cover for activities that the twins were determined to uncover and expose. Their surveillance of the museum during evening hours revealed patterns of activity that confirmed their suspicions about clandestine operations taking place within the building after normal operating hours. Individuals entering through hidden passages, equipment being moved through concealed entrances, and electromagnetic signatures detected by devices borrowed from their great-uncle's collection all pointed toward a sophisticated operation that had been carefully hidden from public awareness for decades. The twins' infiltration of the museum's secret facilities required all of their accumulated experience with supernatural investigation and problem-solving. The building's security systems far more advanced than anything they had encountered during their previous adventures in Gravity Falls. Hidden cameras and motion detectors protected approaches to concealed entrances, while electromagnetic barriers and sonic deterrents created additional layers of defense that would have discouraged most potential intruders from attempting to penetrate the organization's carefully guarded secrets. Yet the twins' small size and natural agility allowed them to navigate security measures that had been designed to detect adult intruders, while their experience with supernatural phenomena made them less susceptible to psychological deterrents that relied on fear and disorientation to discourage exploration. More importantly, their genuine commitment to uncovering the truth about memory manipulation in their community provided motivation that overcame the careful conditioning that had made most Gravity Falls residents instinctively avoid investigating subjects that the society preferred to keep hidden. The discovery of the museum's hidden basement levels revealed the true scope of the Society of the Blind Eye's operations, the elaborate facilities and sophisticated equipment far exceeding anything the twins had expected to find beneath a small-town historical museum. The ceremonial chambers with their tiered seating and acoustic engineering, the storage areas filled with confiscated supernatural artifacts, and the surveillance control rooms monitoring activities throughout Gravity Falls all testified to an organization whose influence and capabilities had grown far beyond its original therapeutic mission. Perhaps most shocking was the discovery of detailed records documenting decades of memory modification procedures. The Society's meticulous documentation revealing not only the scope of their operations, but also the identities of hundreds of victims who had been subjected to unauthorized psychological manipulation without their knowledge or consent. These files contained comprehensive profiles of community members, detailed accounts of their supernatural encounters, and clinical notes describing the techniques used to erase specific memories while implanting false recollections designed to maintain social stability. The twins' exploration of these records revealed the full horror of what the society had done to their community, transforming a town populated by individuals with rich and meaningful experiences into a collection of psychologically diminished people whose authentic memories had been replaced with sanitized versions that conformed to narrow definitions of acceptable reality. Families had been torn apart when supernatural encounters that had brought them together were erased, while individuals had lost connections to deceased loved ones, when their memories of posthumous communications were eliminated to prevent what the society considered unhealthy psychological attachments. The discovery that many of their new friends and acquaintances in Gravity Falls had been victims of memory manipulation filled the twins with anger that transcended their usual patience and understanding, their sense of justice offended by the systematic violation of human dignity that the society's operations represented. These were not abstract victims of theoretical debates about the nature of knowledge, but real people whose lives had been fundamentally altered by decisions made in secret by individuals who claimed to know what was best for everyone else. The confrontation began when the twins' exploration of the museum's secret facilities triggered security alerts that brought society members rushing to contain what they initially assumed was a routine security breach that could be managed through standard procedures for dealing with curious intruders. The sight of two children in areas that should have been inaccessible to anyone without sophisticated equipment and training forced them to recognize that their security had been compromised in ways that their protocols had never anticipated. Blind Ivan, whose role as the society's operational commander had made him responsible for maintaining organizational security, found himself facing a situation that exceeded every contingency plan the organization had developed over decades of careful preparation. The twins' knowledge of society operations, demonstrated by their ability to navigate hidden passages and disable security systems, suggested access to information that should have been impossible for outsiders to obtain, while their apparent immunity to psychological manipulation techniques made conventional intimidation strategies ineffective. The society's initial attempt to resolve the situation through negotiation revealed the fundamental weakness in their position when confronted by individuals who possessed both detailed knowledge of their operations and moral authority derived from genuine concern for community welfare. The twins' passionate arguments about individual rights and personal autonomy exposed the ethical bankruptcy of an organization that claimed to protect people while systematically destroying their most meaningful experiences. Their youthful idealism providing clarity that years of rationalization had obscured. The revelation of the society's true nature to individuals who had not been conditioned to accept their authority created a crisis that threatened to unravel decades of carefully constructed social control. The twins' questions forcing society members to confront uncomfortable truths about the consequences of their actions that they had learned to ignore or rationalize. The sight of detailed records documenting their own memory modifications shocked several members who had forgotten the extent of their involvement in operations that they might have found morally problematic if they had retained clear recollections of their original motivations and methods. Perhaps most dramatically, the confrontation brought about the temporary restoration of Fiddleford McGucket's memories and cognitive abilities. The electromagnetic fields generated by the Society's emergency procedures somehow disrupting the accumulated damage from decades of memory gun exposure and allowing brief periods of mental clarity that revealed the true cost of the potency organization's methods. The sight of their founder's condition and his testimony about the gradual destruction of his intellectual capabilities through repeated exposure to memory modification technology provided undeniable evidence that the Society's techniques carried risks that could not be justified by any conceivable benefits. McGuckett's restored memories included detailed recollections of the society's founding and early operations. His testimony revealing the tragic irony of an organization that had been created to protect people from psychological trauma, but had instead become a source of far greater harm than the problems it had originally sought to solve. His account of the gradual erosion of ethical standards within the society, the expansion of memory modification procedures beyond their original therapeutic purposes, and the systematic elimination of individual autonomy in favor of collective social stability, painted a picture of institutional corruption that shocked even longtime members who had participated in these developments. The twins' demand for the immediate destruction of the memory gun and all related equipment forced society members to confront the possibility that their mission might have been fundamentally flawed from the beginning, their methods creating more problems than they solved while causing immeasurable harm to individuals and communities that had trusted them to act in their best interests. The device that had been created as a tool of healing had become an instrument of oppression whose continued existence posed threats to human dignity and psychological freedom that could not be tolerated by any ethical organization. The decision to destroy the memory gun was not reached easily, requiring lengthy debates among society members who had devoted decades of their lives to an organization whose fundamental purpose was being challenged by two children whose moral clarity had not been compromised by years of gradual, ethical erosion. Some members argued for the preservation of technology that had taken so long to develop and had provided genuine relief to individuals suffering from traumatic supernatural encounters, while others recognized that the accumulated evidence of harm far outweighed any theoretical benefits that continued operations might provide. The destruction of the memory gun took place in the museum's main ceremonial chamber. The device that had caused so much suffering over the decades finally succumbing to forces that its creator had never intended it to face. The twins watched with satisfaction as the sophisticated electronics that had made selective amnesia possible were reduced to smoking ruins, their destruction marking the end of an era when individual memories could be stolen and manipulated by those who claimed to know what experiences were too dangerous for human consciousness to retain. Yet the destruction of the technology was only the beginning of a process that would take months or even years to complete fully. The restoration of stolen memories requiring careful work to help victims understand what had been done to them and provide support for the psychological adjustment that would inevitably follow. The Society's detailed records would prove invaluable for this process, their meticulous documentation providing roadmaps that could guide the restoration of specific memories, while identifying individuals who had been most severely affected by decades of unauthorized psychological manipulation. The immediate aftermath of the Society's exposure created chaos throughout Gravity Falls as residents began recovering memories that had been suppressed for decades. Their restored recollections of supernatural encounters and paranormal phenomena creating psychological disruption that required careful management to prevent community-wide panic. Some individuals welcomed the return of meaningful experiences that they had mourned without understanding why, while others found themselves overwhelmed by restored awareness of cosmic truths that their minds had been modified to reject. The twins found themselves serving as informal counselors and guides for community members struggling to integrate recovered memories with their existing understanding of reality. Their experience with supernatural phenomena making them valuable resources for people who were encountering evidence of paranormal activity for what seemed like the first time, but was actually the restoration of suppressed knowledge. Their patient explanations and practical advice helped many residents develop coping strategies for dealing with expanded awareness of the supernatural forces that had always existed in their community. Perhaps most significantly, The society's dissolution marked the beginning of a new era in Gravity Falls, where residents would be free to make their own choices about how to respond to supernatural encounters, their decisions no longer subject to manipulation by individuals who claimed to know what was best for everyone else. The elimination of systematic memory modification did not eliminate supernatural phenomena from the community, but it restored to residents the fundamental human right to remember their own experiences and make informed decisions about how those experiences should influence their understanding of the world. The transformation of Gravity Falls from a community controlled by hidden manipulation to one where residents possessed authentic awareness of their supernatural environment created both opportunities and challenges that would take years to fully understand. The restoration of individual autonomy, requiring careful balance with community safety concerns that had originally motivated the society's formation. Yet the twins' intervention had demonstrated that these challenges could be addressed through honest cooperation and mutual respect, rather than through the systematic violation of human dignity that had characterized the Pacet Phrymes society's approach to supernatural phenomena. The legacy of the Society of the Blind Eye would serve as a cautionary tale about the dangers of paternalistic control and the importance of preserving individual rights, even when protecting people from knowledge that might cause psychological discomfort. Their dissolution marking a victory for human dignity and personal autonomy that would resonate throughout the community for generations to come. The aftermath of the Society of the Blind Eye's dissolution created ripple effects throughout Gravity Falls that extended far beyond the immediate chaos of restored memories, fundamentally altering the social fabric of a community that had lived for decades under the influence of systematic psychological manipulation without understanding how profoundly their collective consciousness had been shaped by forces they could not perceive or resist. The restoration of authentic awareness to hundreds of residents who had been living with artificially modified recollections created challenges that no community had ever been forced to confront, requiring the development of entirely new approaches to social cohesion and individual psychological support that could accommodate supernatural phenomena while preserving mental health and civic stability. The immediate period following the memory gun's destruction was characterized by widespread confusion as residents struggled to integrate recovered experiences with the carefully constructed false narratives that had been implanted to replace their authentic recollections. Individuals who had been living with vague feelings of incompleteness or persistent depression suddenly found themselves confronted with memories of encounters that explained their psychological symptoms while simultaneously challenging their fundamental understanding of reality and their place within it. The Hendricks family, whose encounter with mysterious lights had been among the society's earliest interventions, experienced the return of their cosmic revelation with emotions that ranged from profound joy to overwhelming anxiety about the implications of renewed contact with intelligences beyond human understanding. Thomas found himself remembering not only the original encounter, but also months of subsequent research and astronomical observations that had filled his life with purpose before being erased by well-meaning individuals who had decided that such knowledge was too dangerous for ordinary citizens to possess. Mary's restored memories included her correspondence with researchers around the world and the growing understanding of her family's place in a cosmic community that extended far beyond the boundaries of Earth. Her sense of isolation and meaninglessness during the years of modified memory, giving way to renewed purpose and connection to something larger than mundane domestic concerns. The children's recovery of their advanced knowledge and artistic abilities created adjustment challenges as they struggled to understand how they had somehow lost capabilities they were certain they had once possessed. Their restored memories providing explanations for talents that had seemed to disappear without reason. Yet the family's reunion with their authentic experiences was complicated by practical considerations about how to integrate cosmic awareness with the demands of ordinary life in a small-town community. Their restored knowledge, creating social isolation, as they discovered that many of their neighbors remained uncomfortable with discussions of phenomena that challenged conventional understanding of the universe. The society's legacy of enforced ignorance had created cultural patterns that persisted even after the organization's dissolution. Community members, often preferring comfortable illusions to truths that required fundamental reassessment of their worldview. Dr. Rebecca Castellanos experienced perhaps the most dramatic restoration, her recovered memories revealing not only the extent of her supernatural research, but also the systematic campaign of harassment and intimidation that had been designed to force her departure from Gravity Falls before her investigations could expose the society's operations. The return of her scholarly enthusiasm and analytical capabilities was accompanied by anger at the violation of her intellectual freedom and the destruction of research that might have advanced human understanding of paranormal phenomena. By decades, her decision to resume her anthropological studies with renewed vigor created opportunities for community members to understand their experiences within broader scientific frameworks that could provide psychological comfort without requiring denial of supernatural realities. Her expertise in cultural adaptation and belief system integration proved invaluable for helping residents develop coping strategies that acknowledged paranormal phenomena while maintaining psychological stability and social functionality. The restoration process was complicated by the discovery that some memories had been so thoroughly erased that complete recovery was impossible. The neural pathways that had once contained specific experiences having been permanently damaged by repeated exposure to electromagnetic pulses that disrupted normal brain function. These partial recoveries left individuals with fragmentary recollections that provided tantalizing glimpses of lost experiences without the context necessary to understand their significance or integrate them into coherent personal narratives. Children who had formed friendships with supernatural entities found themselves experiencing powerful emotional attachments to beings they could barely remember, their restored memories insufficient to explain the depth of grief they felt for relationships that had been stolen from them by adults who had decided that such connections were psychologically harmful. The society's assumption that invisible companions were products of childhood imagination rather than genuine supernatural relationships had led to interventions that caused far more psychological damage than the original encounters they had been designed to prevent. Elderly residents faced particular challenges in distinguishing between memories that had been artificially suppressed and those that had been lost through normal aging processes. Their restored recollections, often mixing authentic supernatural experiences with false memories that had been implanted decades earlier. The complexity of these cases required careful analysis to separate genuine recovered memories from implanted suggestions, while providing support for psychological adjustment that acknowledged the difficulty of determining which experiences represented authentic personal history. The community's response to widespread memory restoration revealed deep divisions between residents who welcomed the return of their authentic experiences and those who preferred the psychological comfort of modified memories that had protected them from awareness of phenomena they found disturbing or incomprehensible. These philosophical differences created social tensions that threatened community cohesion, as individuals struggled to maintain relationships with people whose understanding of shared experiences had been fundamentally altered by memory modification procedures. Some residents demanded the restoration of their modified memories, arguing that they had been happier and more functional when protected from awareness of supernatural phenomena that created anxiety and confusion, without providing compensating benefits to their daily lives. The ethical questions raised by such requests challenge the community's commitment to individual autonomy, forcing difficult decisions about whether people possess the right to choose ignorance over truth, even when that ignorance had been artificially imposed through unauthorized psychological manipulation. The practical challenges of community life were complicated by the revelation that many social institutions and economic relationships had been shaped by society operations that had systematically influenced decision-making processes through strategic memory modifications. Business partnerships that had seemed mutually beneficial were discovered to have been based on suppressed recollections of supernatural encounters that had originally brought people together, while community organizations found themselves struggling to understand their actual purposes. After decades of subtle manipulation by society members who had used these groups to further organizational goals, the police department faced particular difficulties as officers recovered memories of supernatural encounters that had been erased to maintain their psychological stability and professional effectiveness. Their restored awareness creating conflicts between official duties that required them to enforce conventional legal standards and personal knowledge that many crimes involved paranormal elements that existing laws could not adequately address. The integration of supernatural awareness with law enforcement responsibilities required extensive retraining and policy development that acknowledged paranormal phenomena while maintaining public safety and legal consistency. Educational institutions struggled with questions about how to incorporate supernatural awareness into curricula that had been designed around conventional scientific understanding, teachers finding themselves confronted with students whose restored memories included direct experiences with phenomena that exceeded the boundaries of traditional academic subjects. The development of educational approaches that could acknowledge paranormal realities while maintaining intellectual rigor required collaboration between educators, researchers, and community members who possessed relevant supernatural knowledge. Medical professionals faced similar challenges as they encountered patients whose symptoms could only be understood in the context of supernatural encounters that had been systematically erased from their medical histories, the Society's interventions having created gaps in documentation that made accurate diagnosis and treatment impossible. The restoration of complete medical records revealed patterns of psychological and physical symptoms that had been misunderstood for decades, due to the artificial removal of supernatural context that was essential for proper clinical assessment. The economic impact of memory restoration created additional complications, as residents discovered that their career choices and financial decisions had been influenced by modified memories that had eliminated awareness of supernatural experiences that might have led them in different directions. Some individuals found themselves questioning fundamental life choices that had seemed natural and appropriate when made within the context of artificially limited awareness, their restored memories suggesting alternative paths that might have provided greater fulfillment and purpose. The revelation that the Society of the Blind Eye had maintained financial relationships with external organizations raised disturbing questions about the scope of memory manipulation operations and the possibility that similar activities were being conducted in other communities throughout the Rizin-Amal region. The discovery of correspondence with government agencies and academic institutions suggested that Gravity Falls might have been a testing ground for psychological control techniques that were intended for broader application, the implications extending far beyond local community concerns. The twins' role in exposing the Society's operations made them focal points for community gratitude and resentment in equal measure, their youth and outsider status creating both advantages and disadvantages. as they worked to help residents adjust to restored awareness of supernatural phenomena. Some community members viewed them as heroes who had liberated the town from decades of psychological oppression, while others blamed them for destroying comfortable illusions that had protected people from truths they found difficult to accept. The process of community healing required careful attention to individual needs and circumstances that varied dramatically based on the extent and nature of memory modifications that different residents had experienced, some requiring intensive psychological support, while others adapted quickly to restored awareness that felt more natural and authentic than the artificial memories they had been living with for years. The development of support networks and counseling resources that could address supernatural trauma while respecting individual choices about how to integrate paranormal awareness into daily life became a central focus of post-society community development. Perhaps most significantly, the elimination of systematic memory manipulation restored to Gravity Falls residents the fundamental human capacity to learn from their experiences and make informed decisions about how to respond to supernatural phenomena based on authentic knowledge, rather than artificially modified perceptions. The community's relationship with paranormal activity evolved from passive victimization, managed by external authorities, to active engagement, guided by individual choice and collective wisdom, developed through honest discussion and mutual support. The establishment of new community institutions, designed to help residents understand and cope with supernatural phenomena, represented a conscious rejection of the paternalistic approach that had characterized society operations. These organizations emphasizing education and support rather than control and manipulation, support groups for individuals recovering from memory modification, provided forums for sharing experiences and developing coping strategies, while research initiatives encouraged systematic study of paranormal phenomena through methods that respected both scientific rigor and individual dignity. The long-term implications of the society's dissolution extended beyond immediate psychological and social adjustments to fundamental questions about human consciousness and the right to authentic experience in a universe where supernatural phenomena challenged conventional understanding of reality. The community's struggle to develop ethical approaches to supernatural encounter management became a model for other regions facing similar challenges, their experience demonstrating that individual autonomy and community safety could be balanced without resorting to systematic psychological manipulation. The legacy of the Society of the Blind Eye would serve as a permanent reminder of the dangers inherent in any system that claimed the authority to determine which experiences deserved to be remembered and which were too dangerous for human consciousness to retain, their dissolution marking a victory for human dignity that would influence discussions of individual rights and collective responsibility for generations to come. The community that emerged from this transformation possessed a hard-won understanding of the price of freedom and the courage required to face uncomfortable truths rather than accepting comfortable lies, their experience serving as testimony to the resilience of the human spirit when confronted with forces that sought to diminish rather than enhance the authentic experience of consciousness in an infinitely mysterious universe. And so we reach the end of our journey through the shadowed halls of the Society of the Blind Eye, where good intentions paved a road to psychological imprisonment. We have witnessed how the desire to protect can become the impulse to control, how the fear of terrible knowledge can lead to the theft of precious memories, and how even the most brilliant minds can be destroyed by the very solutions they create to save themselves. In the quiet darkness of Gravity Falls nights, when the supernatural creatures still roam and mysteries still unfold, the town has learned to face its fears with open eyes, rather than willful blindness. The society's legacy serves as a reminder that truth, however painful, belongs to those who live it, and that memories, however terrible, are part of what makes us human. Let this tale remind you that even in sleep, in that realm where memories dance and transform, your experiences remain your own. Rest now, knowing that the morning will bring clarity rather than confusion, memory rather than emptiness, and the courage to face whatever truths the day may reveal. The eye may close, but it need not be blind.